3 minutes after 10, a very good morning to you. I've done it already, you know. It's pathetic, frankly. Every time I have a couple of days off, I hope you had a splendid Easter, by the way, I catch myself in quiet moments contemplating new approaches to our time together in the morning. I thought possibly it's time to start relying a little less on the newspapers to decide what the conversational agenda may be. I've mentioned this to you before. Most people outside of this business don't pay any attention at all to the newspapers anymore, but we still are, if you like, enthralled to them. But there you go. I hadn't even got on air yet this morning before I referenced the fact that the Daily Mail is having a fit of the Vapers, the likes of which you have never seen before, in response to Labour's, to my mind, relatively mild, if possibly misguided, so-called attack ads. We'll get onto that a little later in the programme, I suspect, because we begin inevitably with the doctor's strike, the non-consultant doctor. Does it reach your ears differently if I say non-consultant doctors? Because I still think, despite having covered this in some depth over the years, when I say junior doctors, you sort of get an image of Doogie Howser. Do you remember Doogie Howser, MD? Schoolboy doctor? It's a very good American sitcom, ran for quite a while. You say junior doctor and you think of someone in short trousers or someone with a Fisher-Price stethoscope. Junior doctors, sort of, not a proper doctor. Almost all of them are junior doctors. You're a junior doctor unless you're a consultant. So if we say non-consultant doctors, does it reach your ears differently from how it would reach them if I were to say junior doctors? I don't know. I do know this. If you want to earn a good whack as a British-trained medic, go somewhere else. Hop overseas. Go to Australia, for example, where record migration has seen a population surge and the government is luring Britons to fill skills gaps with the prospect of tripling their incomes. 28-year-old nurse from the Isle of Mull arrived in Australia last year and she has done precisely that. Biggest 2-year population increase in Australia's history. But of course, our government has borrowed their stop the boats propagandists in order to somehow create the idea that you can move the traffic in the opposite direction. You couldn't make it up, could you? I don't know how to do it because I've failed already in my bid to not allow the newspapers to set the tone, because sometimes you don't know what to do if you don't turn your attention to the newspapers. I've been doing this job for quite a long time now. In fact, I'm reaching the point where I'm going to stop telling you how long I've been doing this job, because you might start thinking, it's time for some fresh blood. It's time for a change of air. But I've been doing this job for quite a long time now. And for the huge majority of that time, industrial action of any kind, by any organisation, particularly any part of the public sector, was a fairly binary business, wasn't it? It was fairly true. We tried our best. I say things like, if you're opposed to every industrial action, if you're opposed to every single strike, regardless of its merits and its motivations, then you are as stupid or as unhelpful as somebody who is in favour of every strike, regardless of its motivations and its merits. But despite our best efforts, it is often a relatively binary business, with the wiggle room perhaps confined to people who are directly affected. So if, for example, and I appreciate they're not public sector workers, but if the railways are closed because of industrial action, your relationship with those strikers is likely to be informed, at least in part, by how much you rely upon the railways to go about your daily business. If this week you have had an operation or a medical procedure postponed, I suspect it would be a little bit easier to see the industrial action in a negative light than it would be if you hadn't been directly affected by it at all. I don't know. I mean, it's something that perhaps we will look into this morning. But that binary nature seems to me to have gone. And I don't think I'm imagining it. What I don't know, what we can't do is the chicken and egg element of it. The newspapers today are getting cross about boats, obviously. Newspaper attack ads, Labour attack ads. What else are they getting? The Times has gone for the month of disruption that will be caused by the NHS strikes. The Guardian goes further and suggests that they could run until the general election. But what you haven't got yet, and I genuinely don't understand why, that's what I mean by chicken and egg. I genuinely don't understand why. What you haven't got yet really is the allegations of sort of communist like those members of the BMA who secretly moonlight as members of the Politburo. You can normally set your clock by the speed with which junior doctors go on strike, and the BMA are painted as being pretty close to the Taliban. There's a bit of it in one paper. These greedy junior medics are losing the public's respect. Oh, that's interesting. Who wrote that? Well, Theodore Dalrymple wrote that. Who? Well, I can tell you, Theodore Dalrymple is a pseudonym of a retired prison doctor and psychiatrist. So, okay. I mean, listen, no offence to whoever Theodore Dalrymple actually is, but I think the strength of opinion is rendered a little bit greater if you put your actual name to the article that you've written. But anyway, anonymous person who used to be a psychiatrist is adamant that the junior doctors are losing the public's respect. And yet it's half-hearted, isn't it? It's only on page 6. It's not a particularly well-evidenced argument, and it's written by someone who won't even put his real name to the piece. So it's a very different approach from the one that you would normally expect in these circumstances. Remember, firefighters can go on strike, and by tea time they'll be accused of having second homes in Ibiza and only working one day a month, such as the Spanish practices under which they operate. It's all nonsense, of course, but it works. You give the British public a target to attack, even if it is the people to whom we turn in times of crisis and emergency, like doctors, like firefighters. And enough of the British public takes up the invitation to start hating and attacking to ensure that the industrial action loses public support. But it doesn't seem to me to be happening at the moment. Front of the Telegraph. The Junior Doctors Union is plotting to cause chaos for the next 6 weeks by striking after a series of bank holidays, NHS chiefs fear. So it's a 4-day walkout this week. They're looking as an opening to negotiations for a 35% pay increase. And this is important. This is really important. And that would, they say, and I'm sure there's room for some dispute here, but they say that a 35% increase today would bring their salaries back to the levels they were at in 2008. So they're not exactly looking for a lottery win. They are simply looking for a package that reflects the reality they enjoyed in 2008, just before the global financial crisis, which you'll remember David Cameron tried to sort of pin on Gordon Brown, and Alexei Sayle described as the austerity that was the Conservative Party's response to that global financial crisis as the belief that it had been caused by a proliferation of libraries in Wolverhampton. So those are the facts. 35% pay rise, starting negotiation. I'm sure they'd accept less, but not as little as the government is minded to offer. Steve Barclay, Secretary of State for Health, essentially refusing to negotiate because he won't accept that as a starting point. It brings their salaries back to 2008 levels. There is currently no sign of a breakthrough. Senior NHS sources fear there could be more industrial action around the upcoming bank holidays. And the rest of us just have to sit and watch. Chris points out there is one article in the Times warning about extremists in the unions wanting to bring down the entire country, but it's written by someone called Melanie Phillips. So we can take that with a pinch of bile. I want to know where you sit on this. And how do we... This is one thing that occurs to me. One of the ugliest elements of the immigration/Brexit debate over the last few years was people complaining about how many foreign nationals worked in the NHS and claiming that we should train our own. I found that in many ways even more insidious than the more obvious racism that is, for example, on display in an Essex pub not long ago, as Nick was talking about a few. It was like listening to a phone-in from 1978, wasn't it? We won't be covering that today because there is no debate. It's racist, end of. But the more obviously racist arguments somehow don't reach the parts that the subtler ones do. So we should be training our own. I just thought, what if I was a Nigerian paediatrician, or if I was a Polish paramedic, or if I was a German, I can't think, geriatric nurse. There you go. I got the alliteration on all three of those examples. I don't know how I'd feel about those sort of headlines. Seeing people pop up on the telly saying it's outrageous that we've got so many foreign doctors and nurses. We should train our own. You remember the French psychiatrist who rang us in the first week after the referendum to say that her own patients were telling her they'd voted to get rid of people like her. And she rang us last month from France, where she has now settled in, I think, in sort of semi-retirement. That message was horrible. We should train our own. because it sends a message to people trained elsewhere or born elsewhere that they are undesirable or unwelcome or somehow substandard or second class. And I just found that repellent. I think the more interaction you have with the NHS, the more you realise that it's a sort of medical United Nations. The idea of going from A&E and through triage and into the whole machine without encountering somebody who was born elsewhere is pretty close to zero, I would imagine. And yet there it was, held up as an example of something that we needed to take back control of during the Brexit debate. And then you turn to this, where the invitation is to look after our own, as it were, to really treat junior doctors, non-consultant doctors in this country considerably better than they're currently be treated. And the same people that claimed that we should train our own seem to me to be the people most likely to oppose an industrial action designed to, quotes, look after our own, end quotes, better. It's a strange one, isn't it? It's a strange one. Hi, James. I'm in hospital now. It's the first text of the day. And nurses and doctors are coping just fine. They're backing up their colleagues 100% from what I have managed to eavesdrop. There you go. I've got my top snouts eavesdropping from hospital beds on what's actually going on the wards. But I want to extend the conversation a little further than hospital beds. Here is the hierarchy of contributors today. I'd really like to hear from you if you've had an operation or a procedure postponed. Okay? And what do you think of the cause of the strike? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. So you have been directly affected. If you are a non-consultant doctor, then tell my listeners why you are on strike. I never get bored of asking that question, and I never get bored of listening to your answers. The crucial words are recruitment and retention. I know the pay deal is the headline, but the recruitment and retention of doctors is absolutely imperative, particularly when very generous offers are popping up all over the world. And then the third contributor, the third place in the hierarchy of contributors this morning, I think would be the rest of us, whether we are directly affected or not. And I'm interested particularly in hearing from people who are a little bit surprised to find themselves feeling warm towards the doctors. There's plenty of room for negativity. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. You can tell me why these doctors don't deserve either your sympathy or 2008 level pay settlements. But I'm interested in your journey. If you were perhaps once a bit like the person I described at the outset, there's a strike, I'm opposed to it. Don't really need to know the details, don't really need to know who it is. It's the strike. I'm against it. But you're not against this one. I just want to know why not. And that's where everybody else can join in as well. I suppose there's a question about whether or not you recognise my analysis that these industrial actions, particularly this one now, is not, quotes, no, brackets, yet end, close brackets. It's not attracting traditional levels of vitriol. I don't really understand why. If you're a doctor, perhaps you've got insights on that. It doesn't seem to me to be stoking up the fires of fury that you might ordinarily expect in these sort of circumstances. So why do you think that is? And why do you think you personally, you particularly, are feeling a little bit more supportive towards these doctors than you have to any strikers at any point before? Okay? 10:17, let's get the phone lines open. You will get through. Priority, I think, in the first instance to doctors and postponed patients. But come one, come all. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. And if you hit those numbers now, you will get through. 21 minutes after 10. Hi, James. My procedure is going ahead, but I'm in Edinburgh. Thanks, Aussie. I'm not sure quite how helpful that is. Do we know how we've ended up in a country where doctors routinely get paid less than people working in coffee shops, baristas and similar? I never know quite how to frame conversations like that. A barista at Pret-a-Manger can get about £14.10 an hour, whereas a newly qualified doctor, according to the BMA, gets about £14.09 an hour when you break it all down. The reason I'm never quite sure how to make these points is because you don't want to sound like you're describing people working in Pret-a-Manger as being undeserving of what they get, But I don't think it is unreasonable to suggest that you'd expect a doctor. All right, I'll say it. I'd expect a doctor to be earning roughly double what a barista in Pret-a-Manger earns. Does that make me a bad person? Does that make me idealistic or naive or, I don't know, snobbish? Sue's in Chelmsford. Sue, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Sue.
First off, I do support the junior doctors to getting more money, but all of this earning less than a barista in Costa or whatever, or other coffee shops are available, or Pret-a-Manger, is a little bit disingenuous.
Is it?
Okay, yeah. Because year one, straight out of university, on a 40-hour week, which is like, sort of standing hours without any uplift for, sort of 40-hour week, basically. The starting salary is 29.3, and that goes up to 34.8, depending on your rota pattern.
Yeah.
Okay. Year two, it goes up to 34,000, between 34,000 and 40,000. Year three, 40.2 to 47.7.
What's the point you're making? We don't need to go through all of it, Sue. Yeah. What's the point you're making?
It's that first year, and yes, I do believe that they actually deserve more money. But on Nick's programme earlier, somebody said, 35% uplift is only 75 pence an hour.
Oh, but it would be more than that for people in later on the.
No.
Yes.
No, at 29.3 thousand a year, that's £168 per week.
Yes.
That's unaffordable, and I'm not.
Why is it unaffordable? Because compared to other countries, it wouldn't even put us in the.
I think in the situation that we're in at the moment,
yes,
within this country, £168 per week. That's just on that band one.
So, what figure would you be comfortable? I don't want to get bogged down in the numbers, Sue, because because it's boring, frankly. But I accept your central point that you can't apply the percentage in sort of blind terms. It's going to be a much bigger sum of money for someone on a higher salary than it is for someone on the lowest salary. But what would be? So you said £168. I'll take your arithmetic in good faith. What would you say we could afford?
Sort of maybe a bit above inflation at the moment.
So you wouldn't do anything.
Start getting the parity.
So there's nothing to address the sort of 15 years of real term pay cuts.
I'm not saying that I wouldn't address that. I just
so what's the number? Okay, you're the one that likes the
moment.
Numbers. What's the number? You say 168 is too much.
I'd say about 12.5%.
What's that in terms of a weekly number? This is why I'm trying to steer you away from numbers. You've got a problem with 168. What do you like?
Yeah. That works out, it's 12.5%.
What's that?
Or I can sit and work it out if you like.
Well, this is what what do you mean you've just come on here like Carol Vorderman? You've got numbers coming out of your ears. I'm just asking if 168 is too much, what's acceptable?
Hang on, 12.5%.
You should have these sums worked out, but you can't come on the radio laying down the law and saying this, that and the other if you haven't got your number. I think 168 quid a week sounds fair. I don't. I mean, you can say we can't afford it. Claw back some of the money given away in PPE contracts. Have a little look at some of the fraud that they're not properly investigating. Some of the cronies that walked away with tens of millions of pounds for doing next to nothing during the lockdown. I might be unfair. We'll come back to Sue when she's finished her sums. Don't cut her off. We'll go to Morris in Ealing. Morris, what's going on?
Hiya. There is a recruitment difficulty with junior doctors. They're not able to get enough of them in because their starting salaries are very poor. So the people who are being recruited are those who have wealthy parents, independent means to assist them in the early years. They need to lift the salaries at the front and at the lower stage so as to be able to recruit from people who are poorer. And so they need to take a wider view.
How have we ended up here? I mean, I'm not stupid, Morris. You're allowed to challenge that statement if you want, but I don't think I'm stupid. How have we ended up in a country where our doctors, or where the profession, the medical profession, the doctoring profession, has been rendered so unattractive?
Well, take it a bit broader. Nurses, for instance, they don't get paid whilst they are training. My mum was a nurse. She came over here
Okay, but you can take it a bit broader, but the question remains the same. How has the country, have we been asleep at the wheel as a population? Have we just presumed that doctors and nurses are all right? Because whenever we turn up at the GPs or at the hospital, we generally get seen. How have we allowed this to happen?
I think they've been stretched over time.
Yeah.
And we're at where we're at now. But, I mean, like, when people have to subsidise themselves for 2 or 3 years nursing, and they're having
It's bizarre, isn't it?
It's wrong, because if you became a chartered surveyor or a solicitor and you did an apprenticeship, you'd be paid from day one. Go back to the 60s and they were paid.
Yeah, well, I want to get to the bottom of this. I think you're right to broaden out the picture slightly and say, how have we ended up in a situation where the profession, both doctors and nurses, although nurses aren't on strike today, feel so undervalued, so underappreciated? Thank you, Morris. Sue, have you finished your sums?
I have.
What have we got?
Yeah. That would bring the minimum to 32.9 straight out.
What is it a week?
A week. On an hourly rate, that would be £16 an hour.
What is it a week? 168 is too much. What is acceptable?
It's about £64 a week.
Okay, so less than half of what they're asking for. Considerably less than half.
I mean,
about a third. About a third of what they're asking for.
Yeah.
Okay.
But something that should happen with
Yes.
nurses and doctors, I believe, is that they should, if they work so many years in the NHS, then their, university fees should be waived.
No, I can agree with that, but that would cost us a lot of money as well. Just on the question of us not being able to afford it, do you think we could afford that £1 billion that Theresa May gave to the DUP?
Probably not.
Yeah, they managed to find it, though, didn't they? That seems to me to... And what about all those benefits? We've got 350 million quid a week on the side of that bus. Surely they could use that to spend these doctors, to pay these doctors. And it is relevant. You do have to bring this up because it is the same people in charge now that promised us 350 million quid a week to spend on the NHS, who are influencing, dare I say, people like Sue when they arrive at the conclusion that we can't actually afford to pay the doctors. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. If it's 168, we'll trust Sue's sums on that. It seems to me to be, pretty close to unimaginable that you can earn more money working in Pret-a-Manger than you can in your first year as a junior doctor. And I don't really care if you earn more in your second year and your third year. It seems to me that this is a historic moment at which we either restore the prestige, is the word I would use, the prestige and importance of being a doctor, or we allow the prestige and importance of being a doctor to continue to wither, which will do two things. It will denude the NHS in general, and it will contribute to a continuing exodus of qualified staff away from this country to places where they do enjoy prestige and status. Are those the wrong words to use if you're a doctor? I appreciate you're looking at your bills and you're looking at your incomings and your outgoings, but I, as a punter, as a normal-ish member of the public, I want doctors to be respected members of society. I sort of remember growing up, the house, you could point at a house on a street, but that was where the doctor used to live. It was like am I sounding a little bit all creatures great and small? Is that a little bit anachronistic? I don't know why. I know that would be a GP, not a hospital doctor, but is it really naive to think that doctors should be among the most respected and even well-rewarded members of society? And the idea that you could earn in your first year a little bit less than you would in Pret-a-Manger is actually pretty close to disgusting. I don't think it's an extraordinary position there, but it feels it in the current climate. 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. 10:34 is the time, and strikes. What do we reckon? It's not the most sophisticated treatment, perhaps, of the topic under discussion, but I am occasionally just fascinated to know which way the wind is blowing. And my sense is there is a lot more support than the junior doctors, and the government knows what to do with, which is perhaps why the government is doing precisely nothing. Sarah's in Wimborne in Dorset. Sarah, what would you like to take? I've lost the... Shall I put my teeth in and try again, Sarah? What would you like to say, Sarah?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do need to restore the prestige of doctors. Otherwise, we're not going to have a service. We're not going to have a good NHS.
Is that do you think that's the right word to use? As me, sort of my inner 10-year-old is thinking, doctors are prestige and status as well as the rest of it. It should be something in a society that...
They are important. They
Yes.
are. They make such a difference. I mean, that's the problem, even with the system as it is. Even if we pay them properly, it needs a lot of honing and changing because the hours and conditions that they have to endure pretty rubbish. They can work from 8 a.m. I think to 12 to midnight.
You get when you become a consultant. I think you get the prestige and status, don't you? So I suppose there's an argument that you put in your hours, you put in your years, and then it's the promised land at the end of that. But it doesn't seem to be working. A, because we're hemorrhaging people to overseas, and B, because we're not attracting the new candidates that we so obviously need.
Well, we're not, but also because of what Jeremy Hunt did as well. I can't remember it all, but I mean, they worked long hours. I remember my mum was in hospital, at midnight. He stayed on to do the stitches for her, but it wasn't done properly, because he was too tired. But bless him, he did, because he'd brought, he'd seen my mum, in the accident and emergency, or, ER emergency room. So the problem is that, it's great what they do, but, there still are issues with the system as it is. And we do need to pay them for the risks. It must be so stressful for them at the moment. No wonder people don't want to do the job. No wonder they want to train in it.
Yes. Well, how has it happened? You were a nurse, I think, for 20 years. How has it happened? Is it because I used to be a little bit dismissive? Isn't quite the right word, but I used to be a little bit impatient with people arguing that it's all part of a softening up process if you bring the NHS into real trouble, and then it'd be a lot easier to carve it up and sell it off. That is actually already happening. It's hard to come up with another explanation as to how they could have allowed this situation to escalate, to have doctors on less than baristas, coffee shop workers.
I think they probably see doctors as being more liberal, I think. Same with teachers, same with nurses, it seems to me. I really don't know. Well, it doesn't make no common sense involved at all to me how they treat people.
I don't think there is. Well, thank you. I'm with you on this. We're welcome to. I mean, I don't want a consensus unless it is an illustrative consensus. The money, despite Sue's sums, if you break it down, the idea that you're on £14.09 and it would go up to £19 something, it doesn't look like break the bank territory, does it? The BMA's own figures are interesting as well. You've got a doctor with, this is what they would want. A 10-year doc would be on £37.88 an hour. A 7-year doc would be on £33.09 an hour. And the first-year doc would be on £19.06 an hour. A junior doctor with 1 year's experience is currently on £14.09. I don't really like it when this happens, because I know this. I'm not unfamiliar with the numbers. But sometimes you just need to, I've said this to you many times, sometimes I have to say it out loud on the radio before I actually understand what's going on. That's just insane. That's bonkers. £14.09 for a doctor with 1 year experience. How much debt have they taken out to train? Dave's been in touch to say he pays his cleaner £15 an hour, and she hasn't got £30,000 worth of training in the locker. £14.09 an hour. That's why the request seems so high. You sit here and you go, 35%, that's outrageous. But it's not outrageous if you're on £14.09 an hour. And to take Sue's sums into account, if you've got 7 years' experience, you're on £24.46 an hour. They want 33 quid. These numbers, they're not stopping my traffic. Rizwan's in Leicester. Rizwan, what would you like to say?
Hello, hi, James. Thanks for having me on your show.
You're very welcome.
I work as a doctor in the NHS, and I've been here for around 5 years now. Before that, I trained in my home country. What I wanted to say is regarding the pay, like the pay that we receive here, as because I've worked back home, is much better than back home. But I come from a developing nation.
Yes, so the cost of living would be much lower.
Exactly.
Yes.
So when I'm here, initially it feels like a lot of money, but as the days go, you understand that the cost is more.
Okay.
This strike or this demonstration shouldn't have happened in the first place, in the sense that we shouldn't have had to ask for what we need to have a minimum decent living. And the fact that we put in so many hours, it's not only that. There's exams on top of that. There's retraining. There's recertification. There's
relocation. So, you can be sent around the country a bit, can't you?
It's not just the whole thing. It's the whole package. It's this constant stress of being at your peak performance and doing what's good for everyone, and not just yourself, not just for the patient, but the whole community if you look at the GP or if you look at the hospital, we're looking after communities here, not just the individual. And I don't think there's enough people out there, especially in our work and in the organization itself, who's looking after doctors. There are unions.
I think, the unions are doing their best, but I think you've touched on one of the mysteries I'm trying to solve this morning, is that how have we let this happen? How have we, the public, let this happen? The answer is we haven't thought about it too deeply. We haven't been paying attention, and every time the doctors have complained, they've been portrayed as sort of lazy, greedy communists by the voices that still dominate the news agenda. So I think that possibly that is beginning to fall apart. How long, Rizwan, did it take you, having arrived here as a trained doctor, to realise that the profession was not perhaps held in the high regard you expected before you got here?
About a year.
Right.
It didn't take too long.
No.
About a year, really, because when I entered the system, obviously I still hold my profession to a high regard.
Of course.
But it's just how we are treated as junior doctors. Like, we are solving day-to-day things, and there's things like discharges, there's movement of patients, and all these things really take the glamour away from, or it often takes the dignity away from work as well. You just feel like you're just pushing paper, just writing things down on paper and moving to the next. It's become that busy. And in all honesty, we need more doctors. And I know you asked about training more doctors in the UK. I mean, it's okay, but you have to. But the whole idea, the premise is that, if we can't train enough doctors in the UK, then we can obviously pay less money and get doctors from abroad. I think there was a tweet somewhere, one of the members of the parliament might have said this, that, oh, don't worry, we'll get more doctors from India or somewhere else. But the truth is, the only way you're going to get those doctors is because you will be paying less money. But if you want the NHS to be at the top of its performance and looking after the patients well, you need to pay the doctors well. You need to hire the top guns.
Of course you do. And two things to observe. If that tweet was from a member of this government, more than likely we were not long ago part of the constituency of people claiming that we should train our own in order to reduce immigration and stop people like you coming over here and actually looking after us and treating our ills and conducting our medical care. And the second part of it, as you've just demonstrated, it's not an argument, a point I'd heard before, is that if you're coming from a developing nation, the number might look attractive, but when you get here and you want to live and start a family and pursue a life, then that number becomes unattractive very, very quickly as the reality of the economic differences begins to kick in. What's your plan long term, if you don't mind me asking? You don't have to tell me.
I'm still undecided, honestly, because, there are things that I need to achieve in terms of, exams, yes. And, I need to see how all of that plays out. One other thing I wanted to say is, this number about £1 billion going into paying these doctors. I don't understand how the government loses money, because we all pay taxes and we pay higher taxes if we get paid more. So, £1 billion in will not mean that money's gone to, into the ether, evaporated. That money's going to come back. A significant portion.
Well, it will go back into the economy and into the treasury in expenditure and tax. It is almost as if there's a different set of rule books for public sector workers compared to everybody else. Rizwan, thank you, and thank you for everything that you do. That's it. And the average medical student debt, of course, on top of all of what we've just heard, is around the £44,000 mark. So it is very odd. I don't think it's unprofessional of me to wonder why or how this has been allowed to happen. I somewhat lazily blame right-wing media for a huge amount of the country's ills, but not single-handedly. It's right-wing media plus right-wing government plus right-wing lobby groups masquerading as think tanks. Knit those three phenomena together and you'll get a fairly compelling answer to almost any question of why national decline has been permitted to happen. And so it is with NHS doctors. There's no money in it. There's no money in it for the kind of people that own newspapers or fund think tanks. So if they can't make any money out of a doctor's wage, why on earth would they be in favour of higher wages for doctors? Now, agency, the money you get if you're going to work in a hospital through an agency, someone's taking a slice out the top of that. Someone in a hedge fund or in an investment fund is taking a little piece of the action. So they've got no problem with massive wages for agency doctors, despite the fact it's coming out of the same pot that is apparently too paltry to pay NHS doctors a decent scratch. Funny that, eh? It's 10:48, crikey. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the general feeling is it's summed up in this unsigned text. It's absurd that this can even be up for debate, James. Of course, doctors should be very well paid and respected by all. It might be a cliche, but there's always money to bail out the banks. And something a little bit unexpected has happened on my Twitter as well, in that an awful lot of people are getting in touch to say that they earn more than doctors and frankly shouldn't. I shall give you some examples. Ryan says, I'm a lorry driver. I earn more. Although I have a lot of responsibility, it's nothing compared to the burden that they carry. And also, I hate the term junior doctor. They're doctors and the others are consultants. And yes, they're worth the pay increase. Mento says, I'm an experienced CNC programmer and machinist of over 23 years. I find it embarrassing that I earn more than a junior doctor. And I'm on less than £16 an hour. My job should never be worth more than theirs. That is only in the first year, but I don't know that point is landing particularly. Anna says, to put this in context, James, I'm a gardener with rheumatoid arthritis. She mentions that because, in her own words, I'm a bit slow. I currently earn £19 an hour, which is more than junior doctors in their first years of training. And bankers don't have to suffer years as, quotes, junior bankers, says Mike, on low pay and doing long hours to be able to finally reach the prestige pay and bonuses. And Julie at least understood my reference to all creatures great and small. She says, I was walking around Berwick upon Tweed this weekend and I could tell where all the doctors lived. They were revered in those days. And don't at me, I know all creatures great and small was about vets, but I mean like the big house. I grew up in a small town. I was in Kidderminster at the weekend to see the stunning result against Buxton, which was then beautifully followed up yesterday against Fylde Town and has given us a sniff of being in the playoffs. Russ Penn's Red Army coming good towards the end of the season. I digress. I was in Kidderminster at the weekend, and you can tell, you know, these sort of post-Victorian houses, the big old streets, you could tell where the doctor lived. The sort of pressed. Well, also you'd have the practice, talking about GPs rather than hospital doctors, you'd often have the practice on the ground floor of the home. Boo Rock's in Manchester. Boo Rock, what would you like to say? Bo Rock.
Hi, James.
But how do I pronounce your name? Forgive me.
It's Borach.
Borach. With a good scouse, a guttural scouse at the end of it. Borach. Borach, what would you like to say?
Well, it's interesting. As a medical student, I get messages on these groups, WhatsApp groups, and one of them was from a BMA Junior Doctors Committee rep, who basically said that some medical schools have been trying to, I'm quoting here,
yes,
that some of your medical schools will try and pull some real, and there's a swear word, regarding get you to cover for foundation doctors during the strike,
right,
undermining our industrial action. If this does happen, please DM me as soon as possible, as I can correct this matter swiftly and, if necessary, harshly. And so my response, my feeling personally is that although I'm very in favour of nurses striking and doctors striking if necessary, I don't understand why there is a culture of medical students not being allowed to go onto the wards in order to within their respective, capabilities,
yes,
and to cover and to protect patients' lives. And I think that it's very egotistical of BMA reps to say, well, it undermines the strikes if we have medical students caring for patients. And I just don't understand it.
No, I mean, you sort of ambushed me a little bit with this point, so I don't have a particularly strong opinion on it. I'll trust you as a medical student when you tell me that this seems a little bit rum, but presumably the BMA would have some sort of justification by way of response. And we don't know that it extends any further than the single message from the single rep that you've received.
No, of course. I mean, you do hear things around the community, and I have heard similar things.
I mean, industrial action is designed to disrupt, and therefore deploying medical students to minimise the disruption could be portrayed as undermining the industrial action. I suppose that's the logic of the position that you're unhappy with, isn't it?
Any industrial action is supposed to cause disruption. I completely agree with you.
Yes.
But the difference here is that we're dealing with people's lives. I mean, when I'm on a neonatal clinic at the moment, and although foundation doctors typically don't cover those sorts of wards, I mean, you've got 23-week-old babies who should.
No, hang on. You can't just leap from although foundation doctors don't normally cover those sort of wards to an emotional appeal about 23-year-old babies, Borach.
23-week-old babies.
23-year-old babies I work with. 23 week. No, hang on. Don't talk over me when I'm talking over you. Either you could have stepped in to fill gaps left by junior doctors, by foundation doctors, or you couldn't. And it doesn't matter whether they're 23 weeks old or 23 years old. You're not actually being entirely ingenuous yourself, I don't think.
I know what I've done, like I apologise for that.
That's okay.
To give another example,
yes.
then,
but perhaps an example that's pertinent rather than merely emotional.
No, that wasn't my intention. I apologise.
That's quite
what I'm meaning to say is that, for example, the geriatric wards where there are plenty of foundation doctors who frequent, and paediatric wards as well, there are plenty of things that medical students can do to help, like taking bloods or taking
that seems a logical. No, I agree. I completely agree with you. But I can't extend the conversation any further until either the BMA offer up their defence of what you're unhappy with, or we establish that it's a much more widespread practice than we currently know. But I don't know. I mean, if I was a striking doctor, I probably would want to ensure the basic cover, but not to make things too good, if you like, because that would undermine the effectiveness of the broader industrial action. And you're not describing, I don't think you're describing emergency or urgent care in those cases. Mark's in Huddersfield. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Nice to speak to you. Yeah, I just wanted to call in on behalf of my brother, but just to give a little bit of perspective to what he is on the picket line for today. You know, he's a 12-year postgraduate surgeon, so 12 years postgrad, but he's still a junior doctor. Yeah, technically. He's just passed his consultant's exams. But on his pay slip, it says £28 an hour.
Does it?
And he is a hand surgeon, a specialist plastic surgeon. So he could, if you were to slice your finger off in a DIY accident, reattach it. He can reattach your hand, should it be required. The level of skill that he has.
This is why the phrase junior doctor is unhelpful, isn't it?
That's completely mad.
Because like I said at the beginning, you think of Doogie Howser or someone with a sort of Fisher-Price stethoscope, whereas your brother can do the business with severed hands. A few people just questioning Borrock's point as well on the grounds of indemnity, legal cover on the wards, medical indemnity and medical students possibly. I just get that out there before I get bombarded with people raising the point. So £28 an hour, I mean, it's just not right. The problem is, in this country, that if you say that, it sounds like you're sitting in judgment on other people. You know, you say a doctor should earn more than that. Ideally, everyone should earn more than they currently earn. But there are calculations that have to be done, and there are trade-offs. It seems to me outrageous that your brother is earning £28 an hour when Matt Hancock's hourly rate is 10 grand.
Well, there is that. I mean, you know, in terms of levels of competency. But when I look at it, if you place it into the context of something that I can directly compare at the moment,
yes,
the tradespeople working at our house are earning £30 an hour. You know, £240 a day on an 8-hour day.
Yeah,
so,
you're right. So a good joiner.
Not in any way to denigrate what they do, because my granddad was, and my brother's granddad was a builder and a very skilled tradesman. But you do have to ask the question: is the comparable level of skill worth more or less?
It is not unreasonable to expect the bloke sewing the hand back on to be on a better scratch than the bloke who's chopped his hand off on a building site.
Well, there is that, because and also you have to consider that on the same day, and this actually has happened on the same day in work, that he has reattached the digits of a drug dealer who has had his fingers macheted off by a rival.
Good Lord!
And he's reattached the finger of a chippy who's cut his finger off with a jigsaw. So without prejudice or
that's the point, isn't it?
Or judgment, and that is what the people like your Matt Hancocks will never understand, because you can't attach a financial capital value to that.
There it is, and that is
humanity.
No, then that is anathema to the sort of Tufton Street disciples who seem to have their hands on the steering wheel of this country, even after Liz Truss got handed her sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap. Well, you're a good brother, Mark. I like not just your loyalty, but also your clarity, that simple explanation of why it's just not right. And that, I think, puts into much needed perspective this 35% figure, best understood perhaps. And listen, the thing with, it's lies, damned lies and statistics, isn't it? So there will be wiggle room in these sums. But the idea that they are seeking to restore relative parity with 2008 levels of pay should not be controversial. The question of why it isn't prompting the sort of vitriol and negativity you might ordinarily expect, we haven't turned our attention to yet because we've been too busy looking at the strike itself. Rajdev's in Twickenham. Rajdev, what would you like to say?
Yeah, just very quickly. I was trying to make the point, and I made it in the past, but I think it's more relevant now. That I mean, there are wealthy doctors and doctors that do well out of the NHS,
of course,
but they're not in A&E. They the point I was trying to make is that I left the NHS a number of years ago, and it became, when the contract system for GPs changed, it changed everything, because all of a sudden a GP could have actively buy into a GP practice and have no limits on the amounts of money they could earn from the practice side of things, whereas nothing changed for the junior
hospital doctors. What did you leave to do? Do you mind if I ask?
I work in. I'm effectively a lab. A consultant in sort of lab prep work now.
Okay.
But I've got a lot of ex-colleagues of mine that are in junior doctors or radiologists, and the biggest thing they say to me is that they can't afford to buy a house anymore. And one thing I was thinking about that could be a solution here is, why doesn't the government introduce a scheme where they subsidise the mortgages of anybody who works in the NHS, like they did for first-time buyers and things like that? I think that would take a big step to helping people, because fundamentally, people want to buy their own home. They want to think long-term.
I think that's tinkering around. I think that's tinkering around the edges. It's a lot easier just to give them a better pay settlement. Also, you're moving around a lot. You know more about this than I do. You might not be ready to settle down yet. You just become a sort of a landlord. I mean, listen, it's a thoughtful idea, Rajdev, and it might be better than some of the alternatives, but I would have thought that just flat increases across the board. If you're on £15 an hour, you should be on £20 an hour. It's not difficult.
Yeah, and I certainly agree. Out of all the strikes that have gone on, I think that the junior doctors are probably the most deserving of a massive pay rise, given what they've over the time. But the problem is, I think it's fundamentally the public. I get a feeling the public aren't as supportive of the junior doctors as they are other like the nurses and things, from some of the comments that I've heard on the radio, and I don't really understand why that is.
You don't think they are?
Well, I've heard a lot of comments from on other shows that they're earning quite a lot of money already, and I just think. Do you want to know a secret? I presume you're referring to other radio stations.
They'll let anyone on. Seriously,
well,
you got a pungent, ignorant opinion. It used to happen on this show, but they learnt their lesson the hard way. You've got a pungent, ignorant opinion that isn't backed up by facts, but regurgitates whatever bilge has been printed in the Daily Mail this morning. There are radio phone-in programmes where you'll actually get put on air and not challenged. I mean, you're more than welcome to ring this programme, but you'll be challenged. So I wouldn't read too much into. I mean, they'll be defending golly dolls in Essex pubs next, mate, if you go down that road.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, looking back at it, I think it was a mistake to allow the GPs to opt out of hours care for a 6% cut on their profits.
Because it created tiers. It created tiers
and a massive loading on the A&E system, which has gone on and on.
No, I mean, that was probably Labour, was it, that did that rather than the Tories? I can't remember specifically. Can you?
Yeah. I think I seem to recall. But yeah, I mean, I think that was a mistake, and possibly that needs to be looked at again.
And that's what negotiations would be for. I mean, not in this instance, but just the idea of trying to improve a situation. And Steve Barclay, is he on holiday? I don't know. Is he on holiday? He's not on holiday. He's certainly not sitting down with the doctors, is he? But at least he's, I suppose, be grateful for small mercies. At least he's not on holiday. It's 2 minutes after 11. Be careful what you wish for, girls and boys. I have been saying for some time that I wish Keir Starmer would take the gloves off, you know? I should actually just pay a brief tribute to Theo Usherwood, who you may have seen at the end of last week, has stepped down from his duties at LBC to care for a loved one. We're going to miss him enormously, but all is well, and he was very, very moved by the outpouring of affection and gratitude that was prompted by his announcement last Thursday. But I often talked to Theo about, usually while interrupting and teasing him, but I often talked to Theo about Keir Starmer's gentlemanliness as a possible problem. The way that Boris Johnson could stand up and tell really grim lies about the serial sex abuser Jimmy Savile and Keir Starmer's role as DPP. I mean, blatant and obvious lies. You could always tell when Johnson was rattled, despite his carefully nurtured image as a sort of blundering buffoon. He's a nasty basket, and you could tell when he was rattled because he'd reach, without any hesitation at all, for the darkest sewers of social media in pursuit of rhetorical points that he could then throw at Keir Starmer. Suella Braverman is doing the same. We'll talk a little later to former deputy chair of the Conservative Party, who is deeply unhappy with Braverman's very irresponsible and divisive comments about so-called grooming gangs. We'll talk to Saeed Avasi a little later in the programme. But Johnson sort of started it, where there is no depth too low for Johnson to plumb when it comes to trying to land punches on Keir Starmer. And while you wouldn't want Keir Starmer to go as low as Boris Johnson, did anyone else just hear Michelle Obama in the background when I said you wouldn't want Keir Starmer to go as low as Boris Johnson? Because when they go low, we go high. She said, I'm not sure how that worked out for them, given that Donald Trump ended up in the White House, but it was certainly a noble aim. When they go low, we go high. And expressing the view that Keir Starmer needed to toughen up a little bit is the reason why I say be careful what you wish for, because Labour launched some adverts over the course of the Easter weekend, one of which was particularly pungent. I mean, genuinely pungent. It was a claim that Rishi Sunak was personally opposed to the jailing of child sex abusers, built upon statistics that draw upon the period from 2010 to 2022, for approximately half of which Rishi Sunak wasn't even an MP. Here is the exact quote. Do you think adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison? ? And then the answer to that was the claim Rishi Sunak doesn't. And then it then detailed the number of people found guilty of such crimes who hadn't been jailed. Now, listen, before we get stuck into what we think of the tactics, and my early position on this is that it is probably good politics, and I'll explain a little bit more shortly. But before we get stuck into what we actually think about it, I want to explain why it's wrong. It is not the government that decides upon the sentencing of any criminals. The Secret Barrister has written a rather good blog on this. The Secret Barrister is always worth reading or indeed listening to, but never more so than on a subject like this. The position is pretty clear that 4,500 adults convicted of sexually assaulting children avoided prison. The short answer, writes the Secret Barrister, is that we don't know because we know nothing of the facts in those individual cases. The slightly longer answer is that those people avoided prison because a judge, having heard the facts of the case and applied the relevant sentencing framework, decided that a sentence of immediate imprisonment was not necessary. And the rule of law means that such decisions are made by independent judges fairly applying the law and principles of criminal sentencing rather than politicians with an eye trained on the media headlines. And nobody, this is me now, not the Secret Barrister, nobody will understand those simple facts better than a former director of public prosecutions, aka Sir Keir Starmer, leader of His Majesty's opposition. So, statistically, the cases that might provide some sort of political football here will be in the minority. In most cases, the defendant would have been sentenced lawfully and in accordance with the sentencing framework. But it works, doesn't it? It is effective politics. And then other examples began to pop up, culminating in Keir Starmer writing for the Daily Mail, or the Mail on Sunday, I think it was yesterday, that he absolutely stands by this campaign and has no qualms about pursuing it. I'm going to ask you what you think about this, and I'm not going to frame the question in my usual sort of frilly requirements about a hierarchy of contributors. I just want to know what you think. I will want to establish where you stand on politics in general and the current clash in particular, the sort of Sunak-Starmer general election, which looks like being in October or November of next year. But my favourite subjects are sometimes the ones that I don't know what to think about. And at the moment, this fits into that category. I'm swinging. I'm swinging like a pendulum because I quite like to see it up them. The Daily Mail, which is disgusting in any measurable universe. The Daily Mail's pursuit, for example, of Ed Miliband's dead father. I'll say that again in case you missed it the first time or couldn't quite believe your ears. The Daily Mail under Paul Dacre went after Ed Miliband's dead father. I don't know if you've lost your dad. I've lost mine. Could you imagine opening up a newspaper and seeing your late father being portrayed as some sort of traitor who hated this country, which was completely at odds with observable reality? So the Daily Mail went after his dead father. I always think that was an incredible low point, but of course it's the same editor who also went after High Court judges, describing them as enemies of the people, or who called upon Theresa May to, and I quote, crush the saboteurs when talking about democratically elected members of Parliament. And they have gone absolutely bananas today. Labour's attack on Rishi family. I mean, I don't know that anyone is actually going to swallow the idea that Rishi Sunak's household tax arrangements constitute some sort of attack on his family, shining a light upon the household tax arrangements of an actual Prime Minister. That is not, to my mind, is not actually remarkable. I think the sex abuser advert is more interesting than the... I mean, it's frankly a pathetic claim, isn't it? That you're attacking his wife by shining a light upon the household tax arrangements of a married couple, one of whom happens to be the Prime Minister. Last time I checked, she was still taking an awful lot of money from a branch of the family business in Russia, despite sanctions having been imposed by Rishi Sunak's own government. So do you think it's right to raise taxes for working people when your family benefited from a tax loophole? Rishi Sunak does. That one seems to me to be supremely uncontroversial. But of course, the Daily Mail is owned by a man who also takes advantage of the tax loopholes. I don't know what people tell you. If I was a Tory cheerleader, if I was a client journalist defending the Tories, whatever it is that they do, would I have to add, while relating this story to you and pretending to think that Keir Starmer's Labour Party have done something awful, would I have to add, in all conscience, that the owner of the Daily Mail takes advantage of exactly the same sort of loopholes that Rishi Sunak's wife takes advantage of? So I'm clutching my pearls and claiming it'll be the children next, which is obviously nonsense. It's the tax arrangements of two adults who are married, one of whom is the Prime Minister. But if you're reading it in the Daily Mail today, and they've gone absolutely... I'll tell you now, and I'll tell you for nothing, he is terrified about the closing of these sort of tax loopholes that Keir Starmer has promised to bring about. You're not supposed to go after billionaires in this country if you want to get elected, certainly not billionaires that own right-wing newspapers. On page 10, they've got 6 new adverts. They've got Maurice Saatchi back. Remember, he was part of the Margaret Thatcher era Tory campaigns, which was the one that had the red eyes, like the satanic eyes for Tony Blair. So comparing Tony Blair to Satan, yeah, that's absolutely fine. But asking questions about Rishi Sunak's household's tax arrangements, that's outrageous. You can't do that. You can compare him to the Dark Lord Beelzebub, but you cannot ask questions about his tax arrangements. The obsession with penises gets a look in. They've made up some fake adverts. Here's one. Do you think that only men have penises? Keir Starmer doesn't. Well, that's my vote. That's my vote changed. Absolutely. So what else? Do you believe that Jeremy Corbyn was unfit to be Prime Minister? Keir Starmer doesn't. So to prove how disgusted the Daily Mail is by the attack ads on Rishi Sunak, they've hired Maurice Saatchi to dream up 6 invented adverts which go after Keir Starmer in exactly the same way. Well, here's a tough one. Do you think the 2016 Brexit referendum was final? Keir Starmer didn't. It's pathetic, right? And then, like night follows day, you've got Richard Littlejohn on the facing page. You ready for this? This revolting campaign. Just brackets, once again, the owner of this newspaper enjoys the same tax arrangements or similar tax loopholes to Rishi Sunak's wife, and the current editor-in-chief sanctioned attacks upon the dead father of Ed Miliband. The dead father. But anyway, this revolting campaign, brackets, that asks questions about Rishi Sunak's household tax arrangements, close brackets, proves the shameless Chancellor Starmer is happy to drag politics into the sewer. Well, look, credit where it's due. If anybody knows about dragging politics into the sewer, then it would be the Daily Mail. Enemies of the people, crush the saboteurs, our Remainer universities, Ed Miliband's dead father, you name it. They've dragged it. But, the epic hypocrisy of these clowns aside, should Labour go there? Should Labour deploy similar tactics to the Tory party or indeed the Tory media? Diane Abbott made a point which I must confess I'd missed. And she brought Rishi Sunak's ethnicity into it. And she suggested that the advert was intended to play into that that sort of Asian grooming gang rhetoric and suggest that Rishi Sunak was more relaxed about this sort of thing because of his ethnicity. I didn't see that, I've got to be honest. I don't know that there's any way of reading the minds of the people that were behind it, but I didn't read it like that myself. I just saw it as a statistical attack upon the judicial system, upon the criminal justice system that was, for the reasons I've just shared with you, that was completely ill-founded because the statistics don't support the claim. But when did they? I mean, that's the mad bit about this story. The idea that anybody on the right of British politics is qualified to criticise anybody else for dragging politics into the sewer. Richard Littlejohn, of all people, writing an article about dragging politics into the sewer. I mean, it's beyond parody. I don't know how Private Eye would deal with this sort of thing because you cannot mock it. It's beyond parody. It breaks the boundaries of irony. Here he is, not dragging politics into the sewer. Keir Starmer is the original Mr. Softy and even has the same haircut. Oh, burn. Sick burn, as the kids say. It beggars belief, but it only beggars belief if you don't understand the fear in the corridors of power over at the Daily Mail that Keir Starmer is going to take meaningful and significant action against precisely the sort of loopholes that Rishi Sunak's wife enjoys. So there's two there, really. There might be others that you want to draw attention to. The first is the claim about sex abusers, child sex abusers, which is, I mean, statistically unfair and quite possibly libelous. I think there's an arguable case there if he wanted to sue the Labour Party. He won't. But I think it might be good politics. I'm not sure. I'm in danger of having my brain boiled sometimes by my own biases, and I am very, very biased against right-wing newspapers that have lied to this country for so long that they ended up voting to become the first population in history to impose economic sanctions on itself, and who weaponise racism and xenophobia in a way that damages us all for generations and distracts attention away from the people actually responsible for the things that could be improved in this country overnight with slightly more progressive economic policies. So I make no apology for that, but I acknowledge it. Just because it's got the usual suspects in such a tizzy doesn't actually mean that it is the right thing to do. But if it's good politics, if it draws attention to problems that the Conservatives have presided over in ways that the voters will be reminded of every single time the Conservatives complain about it, that's the beauty on this one. Embarrassing statistics on the number of sex offenders and violent criminals avoiding jail. Maximum damage on the Conservatives among target voters, and it's exacerbated every time the Conservatives complain about it. Do you think adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison? Rishi Sunak doesn't. So whatever your politics, wherever you come from, what do you think of this? Because although it might be good politics, 0345 6060973, as in electorally effective, it might be bad morals. And rightly or wrongly, some of us perhaps expect a little bit more morality from Sir Keir Starmer than we do from the party of Boris Johnson and Suella Braverman. So what do you think? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060973. It is 24 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're sort of just wondering why or what you feel about these so-called attack ads that Keir Starmer both unveiled and then passionately defended over the course of the Easter weekend. A couple of people reminding me that Richard Littlejohn, who wrote the article today about how Keir Starmer is happy to drag politics into the sewer, and indeed all the pearl-clutching client journalists pretending to be outraged that Rishi Sunak's wife is having her tax affairs examined in one of the adverts. Little John referred to Tony Blair's baby son Leo as Damien, which is a reference to the Omen films, which is essentially comparing him to Satan. That was a baby boy. I mean, you know, come on. You're not going to fall for this bilge from this lot, are you? Or are you? I don't know. Let's find out. Mark's in Reading. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm calling in to say that whilst I completely understand your position that this could be good politics, I don't share that opinion because I don't think, whilst, as you've kind of alluded to, there's obviously moral problems with it.
Where are the moral problems for you, do you think?
Because I don't think the impression that the poster gives, I don't think it's true for the reasons that you've outlined. I don't think it's fair to say Rishi Sunak doesn't believe this when you go through the statistics, you know, for half a second and say, well, you know, he wasn't an MP for half the time. He wasn't anywhere near the leadership.
But in the long tradition of so-called attack ads, I mean, the pure truth rarely gets a look in, Mark, from anyone.
Oh, absolutely. And I completely, I get the
if we put Nigel Farage's Breaking Point poster as the rock bottom of political advertising, would you put this one anywhere near it?
No, I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't.
Okay.
But as you alluded to, first of all, I think people expect Labour to be a bit better than that. I don't think, and this is my main point, really. I don't know that Labour can win this type of fight. I don't think Labour.
That's a good point.
I don't think Labour can ever be more disgusting than Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson or Suella Braverman or Tommy Robinson.
No, and I would once have stopped you from putting all four of those people into the same category, but I won't anymore because they should be.
And there is a spectrum, but I don't think it's a very wide one.
Okay, well, here's the thing. I think you might be right. They're never going to be able to go as low, as enthusiastically as the kind of people that you've just described. But and I will talk about the Mail a bit, despite my determination to wean myself off it in the coming months. They're going to go. Look what they did for Ed Miliband's dead dad. They've already had a go at Keir Starmer's mum's donkey sanctuary. You know, they have no morals. They are absolute alley cats. There is no pretense. Yeah. Richard Littlejohn clutching his pearls today, comparing Tony Blair's baby son to Satan. I mean, there is nothing. There is no depth that they will not plumb in pursuit of a few quid and a pat on the head from the Viscount that owns the paper. Yeah. And that's going to happen. So, on the good politics argument, they fired a shot across the bows over a year out from the election. They've gone right for the jugular of the Conservative Prime Minister, and the client media, the Tory cheerleaders, won't know what to do with this because they start now commissioning Maurice Saatchi to come up with 6 rubbish adverts in response. What are they going to do a month out from the election?
Well, absolutely, and I agree with all of that.
But you're just not comfortable with watching your lot go low.
Well, it's that, but also I don't think that this is going to win over anybody that reads the Daily Mail or anybody that...
Do you not?
No, I don't, because I
the
don't
tax
think...
one?
I think
the tax one?
No, I don't. I think people that read the Daily Mail, and this is obviously a sweeping generalisation,
yes.
I think the idea that they would ever vote Labour is just so anathema to them.
But that's not a reason not to do it. It's not aimed just at them. Do you think it's right to raise taxes for working people when your family benefited from a tax loophole? Rishi Sunak does. That's factually correct.
Now, that one, I have much less of a problem.
That's the one I'm talking about chiefly now.
Yeah, okay.
That will land with a lot of people. Why the hell is he putting my taxes up when his wife is... I know, personally, I'd have gone for the Russian money on this angle as well, but it's early days. Yeah. It's early days, and you can sit there pretending it's appalling that he's brought Rishi Sunak's wife into it. Just don't mention the fact that our columnist went after Tony Blair's baby son. I mean, exactly. So that one will work. That will work with people.
No, of course. And just to go back to your thing about the Daily Mail, the hypocrisy of the Daily Mail and the other publications and media outlets that operate in the same way as them, that's never going to change. And we're never going to sort of expect them to reflect on things they've said and have that, inform the way that they respond to Labour.
I hear it. Yeah, I do.
But I think the personal part of it, I don't know, and I'm not a political strategist, and I'm almost always wrong about what the British electorate do. But I don't know that they had to personalise it in that way. I think they could have made all these points in a better...
Possibly. Well, I'm not a political strategist either, but I'm always right about what the British public will do, and I think that this will work. And I think that although the child sex offender one is unfortunate, Julie, as ever, puts it better than I can. The non-Don stuff is fine because Sunak benefits. Making him look like a personal supporter of child abusers was clumsy and backfired. I disagree with that because the attention on the whole campaign is determined by the complaints about the first one. We wouldn't be talking, really, about the second one if it wasn't for the brouhaha stormed up by the first one. I don't know, but I'd mentioned that my pendulum was swinging, and the appeal to the morality muscle is an effective one. You do kind of think you shouldn't really be going there. But if it is going to win, if it is going to translate into political capital, it's hard to argue against doing it. And that perhaps makes you as bad as the other lot. Thomas Watts is here now with the headlines. It's 11:35. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. When they go low, we go high, said Michelle Obama shortly before Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton to the White House in America. And also, of course, the backfiring of the deplorable. Donald Trump supporters, I don't think anyone could argue now, were undeserving of that title. They are enemies of the most basic tenets of democracy, as well as largely vicious racists, as we've subsequently discovered. But calling them deplorable backfired because they revelled in being called deplorable. So when the Labour Party goes after Rishi Sunak with an inaccurate claim about his relationship with child sex abuse prosecutions and an accurate claim about his household taxes, are they breaking a bond of trust with you? Are they going low when you would expect them to go high? I'm not sure. I'm genuinely not sure. I think there are, as Julie reminded us, two very different issues here. One thrown up by the tax question, which inevitably exercises the Daily Mail because their owner benefits from similar loopholes to the ones enjoyed by Sunak's wife. But the other one, which there's a good piece in the newspaper today, actually, by the chief executive of Conservative Home, suggesting that it is it's very good, it's very effective. They help Labour, these sort of attack ads. Stephen Bush, writing in the Financial Times, points out that every electoral cycle has a campaign launched by a party that then provokes outrage and condemnation from others. The media gets unduly obsessed with it. I think I'm in that category. I don't think you care as much about this kind of thing as I do. You care a lot more about the doctors' strike, for example, than you do about Labour ads, but the media likes nothing more than examining its own navel, and that is what I'm allowing myself to do a little bit of today. And then Bush continues in the FT. They then go on to win the election. But I am interested in what you think. Sheila's in Stratford. Sheila, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
first-time caller.
Welcome.
I'm Asian and extremely proud that Rishi got in. Might not believe in everything he does or says, but my question to you, sir, is Sakir now placing these adverts that are racially aggravating because Rishi is Asian? Does he think that, does Labour believe, well, I don't think they'll win because I'm definitely not supporting them, right, and nor are quite a few of my friends.
Yes.
Does he believe that by attacking, I mean, you know, he was part of the justice system. Does he believe that by plastering his brown face against adverts that how should we call it, the indigenous population will think that,
I don't generally use that word on this programme because I think it's meaningless. But I don't know, are you asking me or are you asking him? Because
I'm just thinking.
But what face should he use? I mean, Rishi Sunak. It is Rishi Sunak's face, and it is a criticism
however,
of. Go on.
So if that's the case, sir, If that is the case,
you don't have to call
why...
me sir, Sheila. You can call me James. What is the question that you're asking? Is there a racial subtext to a criticism of his wife's taxes?
Yes, absolutely.
No.
Because
how can there be?
The Keir didn't do this with Boris. He didn't do it to Boris, and Boris did lots of awful things. Well, he didn't do it to Liz Truss, who did.
Well, because he's not going to be fighting them in a general election in 18 months' time. This is part of the election cycle.
It is, but isn't it, just as Michelle Obama has said, it's just too low?
Well, she hasn't said that about this. How
Hillary Clinton?
How can you put a picture of Rishi Sunak in the newspaper without him having a brown face?
You can't do that, obviously.
So what brings the racial subtext into it then?
The racial subtext is the brown skin. The brown skin.
But that's the only skin he's got, Sheila.
It is the only skin he's got, but they've never done this before. Why are they doing this
because
now?
I've just answered that question. Let's not go around in circles. This is the election cycle. They are now on a war footing for the general election, and therefore their advertising campaign features the Prime Minister that they will be fighting to depose at the next general election. I don't know who else you think could appear in these posters.
No, I hear you, yes. Rishi Sunak is brown. I get you. I totally understand.
Do you?
But the slogans, yes, I do.
Right.
But the slogans that they are putting against him, which you have also said, which some are true, some are not, they're half-truths, they're inaccurate. Why are they placing these inaccuracies against his name and his photo?
Because he's the Prime Minister.
But then, like you said, it's the judges that put these guys to prison.
Yes, but this is a political attack ad. I mean, Tony Blair doesn't really have red satanic eyes, but the Conservative adverts in 1997 portrayed him as having them.
True. It's just, I don't know, just like yourself, it's a seesaw at this moment in time of emotion.
It didn't sound like a seesaw. You were adamant that you're never going to vote for him and that he has been racist. So I'm just looking for a tiny scintilla of evidence. No, that's fine. I understand that. But what is it about these two adverts that makes you think his ethnicity is relevant?
Like you said.
Well, don't say like I said, because I don't think that the adverts do bring his ethnicity into it in any way, shape or form. I mentioned that Diane Abbott did, but if you're a sworn anti-Labour person, I doubt Diane Abbott is someone who's...
I've voted Labour, apart from when Jeremy Corbyn got in. I did vote Labour.
Right.
My family have always voted Labour.
So what is it about these adverts that makes you think his ethnicity is pertinent then?
How can I put this without being...
Well, just speak.
I don't think you'll ever understand because you're not brown.
Right.
And, you know...
Well, I can. I mean, just use words to explain. Why? I mean, because all you've mentioned to me is his face is brown, and I don't know what the alternative would be. They could hardly, Photoshop him to make him not brown, could they? So what face are they supposed... when they're launching an attack upon the sitting Prime Minister, whose picture should they use?
Oh, no, I hear you loud and clear.
Well, you keep saying that, and then you keep returning to these slightly half-chewed morsels.
Let me reiterate then.
Don't reiterate, because you haven't iterated anything yet. Why is it racist? You haven't. You've just said it's racist because he's got a brown face.
No. You're twisting my words, sir.
I'm really not.
No, absolutely
Don't
not.
call me
I
sir.
haven't
It
said
sounds
that
silly.
at all.
Go on,
all right, James, I haven't said that at all. What I'm saying is that these slogans or these campaign sentences that they have put against his name...
Do you think... Let me read one, just so that everyone knows what you're talking about. Do you think it's right to raise taxes for working people when your family benefited from a tax loophole?
Not.
Rishi Sunak does?
No.
What no?
I disagree with him. I mean, I agree with Keir Starmer there, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. You know, the Russian loophole, yes, that's disgusting.
So where does ethnicity come into it?
I believe in. But the rest of them, I don't believe in them.
No, but that's fine. But that's not what I'm asking. Where does the ethnicity come into it?
The ethnicity comes into it because these slogans that have gone on individual posters...
But there aren't any slogans.
They're not untrue. The context of the advert... The context of the
that's a political advert playing fast and loose with the truth. That's as old as politics itself. I just need one line, a single sentence.
Something should do that.
Yes, but what does the brownness of his face have to do with any of this, Sheila? Because you were pretty adamant when you came on.
And I still am.
Right.
There'll be people out there that will associate his skin colour, his hair colour with the slogan and think this is let's vote Labour. And that's the key, it's true.
And when Suella Braverman attacked
Oh, she is awful. She is awful.
But you're going to vote for her.
I won't. The thing is,
I don't know that we can continue this conversation. I'm very confused, Sheila. Who do you like?
Well, I don't like any of them.
Okay.
To be perfect.
Oh, that's
there
all.
is no one out there.
That's fine. Well, I'm still struggling. It could be, as you say, a part of my whiteness, my white privilege, indeed, that I can't see what the ethnic subtext would be to these adverts, except the point Diane Abbott made, which was essentially saying what Keir Starmer is doing is a watered-down version of what Suella Braverman did, which leaves it pretty much impossible to attack the Labour Party without also going after the Tory Party much harder. Thank you, though. Jeanette's in Lyme Regis. Jeanette, what would you like to say?
Hi there. That last call threw me off a little bit.
Threw me off a little bit as well, but you're all right. I've got to carry on till 1 o'clock.
The guy before there was excellent.
Yes,
He raised some really good points. Yeah, absolutely. So as for the campaign as a whole, I think Labour have to be really careful about this. Sort of looking a bit more about the one about jailing sexual offenders. I think Labour should stop that. Reason is, if your opponent is prepared if they have no limits as to how low they are prepared to go into that bottomless pit, in order to win against your opponents, you have to be prepared to go with them. And I think that's completely the wrong strategy. With regards to the other one about taxation, I'm wondering why the press had no problems with the attack on Rishi Sunak's wife in terms of her non-dom status. So why is it all of a sudden targeting Rishi Sunak's family now, whereas before it was...
Well, they did. The Mail is always going... All of the... And any media owner who benefits from the sort of loopholes that Rishi Sunak's wife benefits from is going to clutch their pearls and pretend to be outraged whenever a light is shone on it. I'm more personally... I mean, I don't know what the current state of play is, but I was more shocked by the Russian angle than I was by the non-dom angle. You can't have a Prime Minister or a Chancellor of the Exchequer whose household finances leave them paying less tax in percentage terms than normal voters. I just think that's mad, but hey ho, people are prepared to defend it. When Johnson stands up in the House of Commons and tells lies about Keir Starmer and Jimmy Savile, does that not ever so slightly open a door towards a dirtier approach from the Labour Party than you might otherwise be comfortable with, or not?
I think maybe Labour could have a peek through that little door, but I think they need to be very careful about going through it.
It's very nicely put. Have a little peek through the door. And don't forget, the attention that this has drawn is all bad for the Tories. The more pearls that are clutched, the more oxygen the story gets, and the more people, perhaps even like Sheila, will be going, well, why does he? Why does his own family take advantage of a tax loophole while he's putting my taxes up? 11:46 is the time. Thank you, Jeanette. Baroness Warsi with us next. Saida Warsi talking about a collection of letters that have been sent to the Prime Minister calling upon Rishi Sunak to distance himself from some of the comments made by Suella Braverman recently on the issue of child sexual exploitation. It is 11:51. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We may get back to those ads shortly, but first, Suella Braverman has been urged to withdraw divisive comments around child sexual exploitation by dozens of medical bodies, businesses and Muslim community organisations. And a number of organisations across the country have written to Rishi Sunak today to express deep concern at what they branded irresponsible and divisive rhetoric from the Home Secretary. Baroness Saida Warsi is a Conservative peer and, of course, a former minister, former co-chair of the Conservative Party. And Saida, although you're not a signatory to these letters, you're sympathetic, I think, with their content. Why?
Because, first of all, I think it's quite unprecedented that we have such a broad range of people, the kind of people who wouldn't normally engage in politics, from the Indian Doctors Association, they've got people from British Nigerian background, Kenyan background, Bangladeshi background, Egyptian doctors, psychiatrists, surgeons, bankers, lawyers, accountants, entrepreneurs, the kind of people who normally kind of get on with their day job. Interestingly, the kind of people who probably would vote Conservative, and I know some of them would donate to the Conservative Party. For people like this to come out and say enough, and this rhetoric has to stop, is really quite unprecedented. And the reason I'm supporting it is because I think the Prime Minister has to get a really strong message that this kind of rhetoric, whether it's on small boats, whether it's the stuff she was saying on the weekend, which is not based on evidence, not nuanced, not kind of explanatory in any way, it has got to stop. And again today we've woken up to a story where she's having a go at the police for removing gollywog dolls from a pub, where it now transpires that the pub landlord has been saying incredibly unsavoury things
about lynchings. For anyone who's not fully across that story, a long and inglorious history of avowedly racist comments and commentary. Why is she doing it? Why do you think she's doing it?
Well, there are only two explanations, aren't there, James? Either this is a deliberate election strategy, which is divisive and is damaging for the country. Actually, as a Conservative, it's long-term damaging for the brand of the party, and will in the end cost us votes and an election. Either that's one explanation, and it's a disturbing kind of explanation, or the other explanation, which I think is just as disturbing, is that she's a Home Secretary that can't make policy on evidence and is unable to communicate policy in a way which doesn't need to rabble-rouse and be racist rhetoric.
We're referring...
But either way, it's not good news, is it?
Well, not for your party. What's happened to the party you joined, do you think?
I actually
Does it still
thought that
exist?
with the change of... if you think about the people that I sat around the cabinet table with, James, Ken Clarke, Dominic Grieve, Justin Greening, David Willits, David Cameron, no, it doesn't exist. That centre ground, what I thought was liberal, conservative, one nation party, it doesn't exist. And it is deeply disturbing that so many people in that centre ground have been culled. But I did think that the change of leadership with Rishi Sunak taking over could be a moment to restore sane politics, evidence-based politics, grown-up politics again. And I think it just seems that as long as the Home Secretary is there and the Prime Minister doesn't have the backbone to kind of call her out or get rid of her, then that same kind of politics that we've seen for too long now of, factless, evidence-less, kind of rabble-rousing type of politics continues. And it's dangerous. I mean, we're 18 months potentially out from a general election. I genuinely hope this is not what we're going to see on a week-to-week basis, because divisive rhetoric might win you a couple of votes, might even win you the odd election, but it damages the country, James. And in the end, my clear view is that if you are a Conservative and you are a patriot, then your commitment to keeping your country united and safe and secure comes over and above winning the odd election or the odd vote here and there, because your commitment to your country should come before your commitment to your party.
And some people listening will be keen for me to point out to you that the grooming gang incidents in Rochdale, Rotherham and Telford were largely committed by men of British Pakistani heritage. So when she singles out those crimes and those areas, what is she doing that is problematic specifically?
I think what's interesting in all three letters is that is acknowledged, that the clear acknowledgement is that every single perpetrator of every single sexual violence against a child in this country should be brought to book. It is a tragedy, James, that 500,000 children in our country are sexually abused or exploited every single year. That's 1 in 20 children. The overwhelming number of them are tragically exploited or abused within their home by their family or their close friends and acquaintances. And what the Home Secretary should be doing is making sure that no perpetrator feels that they will get away with it and no child feels that they are not protected. I think what concerned people and the reason that prompted them to write this letter was two things. One, the fact that she chose not to make that distinction and not to base it on her own evidence, because the Home Office reports clearly show that the vast majority of perpetrators are white, and that there isn't this link, this cultural link or this political correctness link, which her and the Prime Minister keep speaking about. And this has been proven in report after report, including the Linden report, which was out less than 12 months ago. So I think the concern was that she hadn't based this on actually protecting victims. And this was the strongest point that the medical professionals were making who deal with victims of sexual exploitation. But secondly, that there were no caveats. If she had said, look, there are a small number of very high-profile cases in these particular cities which have had this particular form of sexual exploitation, where the majority of the perpetrators were of this origin, i.e. what I am talking about is a subset of a subset of a subset of a subset of perpetrators, and I have chosen to make those perpetrators my priority and the protection of those people subjected to sexual exploitation a priority, I think people would say, fine, it's odd that you would choose which perpetrators to go after and which children to protect. It's an odd way for a Home Secretary to make decisions. But I think people would be completely behind her. But she didn't say that. She said all British Pakistani males. And that includes, people that we know in public life, Zayn Malik from One Direction, Adil Ray, who does Good Morning Britain, sports stars. It includes my dad,
and
the
they
father
have that,
of five girls.
So some of those,
who's a massive feminist.
Some of those men have been revealing some of the racism and some of the abuse that they've received since those comments. The musician Nitin Sawhney as well. So she is, she's opening the door then to the idea that the egregiousness of a crime is somehow affected by the ethnicity of the perpetrator. Is that what we're saying?
And her own Home Office reports show that there is no link to that. But she's also deciding that she's going to pick and choose which crimes matter to her and which don't. So in the whole spectrum, tragically, of 500,000 children being sexually abused and exploited in our country every single year, she has decided that this small number of a subset of a subset of a subset are the ones that she's going to focus her energies on. And it just seems like an odd way in which to make policy. And it also means she's creating blind spots, because if the perpetrator doesn't fit Suella Braverman's version of a perpetrator, then we're going to overlook them. If a victim doesn't fit Suella Braverman's of an interpretation of what a sexual exploitation victim should be part of. And what's really interesting is one of the groups that have signed this letter, the Muslim Women's Network, have done work where they've found Asian victims of these perpetrators. And there's a huge injustice in the way in which a lot of this has simply not come to the fore. And if I was Home Secretary, the first thing I would be doing is asking for heads to roll in the police and in the local authorities who looked at these girls and didn't overlook the fact because they were being politically correct. I mean, it beggars belief that a police force, which sadly consistently has been accused of being institutionally racist, is somehow tiptoeing around not wanting to offend brown people. The reason they didn't treat these girls well because there was a class issue. They saw them as dispensable. They saw them as not being worth the effort. They saw them as coming from broken homes. They saw them as coming from troubled families who in the past had connections with the police. They saw them literally, tragically, words that were used by victims, trash. And they ignored them. And I would like the Home Secretary to be going in there, not walking around the streets with the police officers, but holding them to account, as the IOPC report from last year showed, saying who was responsible for this, and heads should roll that you did not protect these children.
Finally, and I asked this question with a bit of discomfort. It's certainly not one I could answer, but is Suella Braverman's own ethnicity pertinent here? Do you think that a white Home Secretary would have been able to make these comments with a degree of impunity?
I don't think any of my colleagues can use the pigment in the skin as some sort of a defense mechanism to say they're not racist. Brown people can be racist too. And if your
are you calling
your language,
are you calling the Home Secretary racist?
I am calling her rhetoric racist. I am. And I'm supporting the letters which call her rhetoric racist. And I think I say that as somebody who was subjected to racism growing up, in the 70s and 80s, this is not a term that I use loosely. And it's certainly not a term that I use easily when I talk about another woman of colour, another parliamentarian of colour. But I think that somehow we have to call this out, just because people of all colours and all backgrounds and all sexualities can be homophobic, and people of all backgrounds, sexualities and colours can be racist. We only have to look across at what happened in places like Burma, where people kind of thought Buddhists couldn't be violent, and then we saw what happened to the Rohingya community. We look at racism existing today in Modi's India, and the violence that minorities, including Christians and Dalits and Muslims, are subjected to show that there is just clear racism at play. And so I just think it is important for us to call this out, and for us to say that just because you are a politician of colour does not mean that you can engage in language which a politician who's white would not be considered acceptable. That language would not be considered acceptable for them to use. But also remember, Jim, she's the Home Secretary. She should be using her words carefully. She should be measured. Her policy making should be rooted in evidence. She should be thoughtful. She's responsible for the security of our country. We need a grown-up in that role. We certainly don't need somebody who's trying to, perform some sort of Trump tribute act.
Crikey. Baroness Saeed Abbasi, many thanks indeed for your time this morning. And you can find out more about those letters that have been sent shortly on our website as well. 3 minutes after 12 is the time. It is 6 minutes after 12. I enjoy constructive criticism. This is from Jim. You've tried have tried and trusted methods with which you use to win an argument. You're absolutely right. I do. I wrote a book about why it is often not helpful, Jim. But that does not make you right. Indeed, it doesn't. You are weakening future criticism of conservative attacks on Starmer. The majority of the tabloid press now have greater permission to attack Starmer than they could have imagined possible. The Guardian does not have a track record of this kind of politics. It's not as if Starmer is short of powerful critical material which he could use to oppose the government if he chose to use it. This has been a sad weekend, writes Jim, for British politics and the Labour Party. I respectfully and completely disagree with you, Jim. There is no depth to which the Tory press will not go in pursuit of a Labour leader. Ed Miliband's dead dad didn't become fair game for Paul Dacre because of something Ed Miliband had said about David Cameron. God, you have to go through a Rolodex, don't you, of former prime ministers to go back to as recently as 2015. It just doesn't wash, Jim. It's a touching naivety that you display. Richard Littlejohn comparing Tony Blair's baby son to Damien, either from The Omen or from Only Fools and Horses, which also compared Rodney's baby son to Damien from The Omen. The idea that they're going to go, oh, well, Keir Starmer's really done it now. It just doesn't wash, Jim, mate. They'll go beyond the bottom of the barrel without any provocation or encouragement whatsoever. At least that's my opinion. Alan's in Wandsworth. Alan, what would you like to say?
I agree completely.
Well, what do you know?
Well, I do know because I worked for the Labour Party for a good number of years. In the run-up to the 1997 general election, I was Director of Campaigns and Elections for the Labour Party, and I still knock around a little bit around the world of politics and
so that's me
campaigning.
That's me told. That makes you Alan Barnard.
Yes, exactly right, yes. This stuff, there is no depth the Tories won't go to. The Labour Party went high for many, many, many years, and we lost and lost and lost and lost. And when we started to learn to mix it a little bit, we started to have more of a chance. And Keir Starmer's mixing it now. I was getting a little bit frustrated listening to, as you say, the naivety of some of the contributions. This is political rough and tough. The Tories just should not be allowed to get away with what they're getting away with. And it is part of healthy political debate for opposition parties to point out their failings. Rishi Sunak can come out and say, he can come out and defend his Conservative Party's record, of which he is now the leader and the country's Prime Minister. If he doesn't agree with what Labour is saying about whether it's the historic paedophile jailings or whatever it might be, he can come out and defend himself. Look, he's a big man. Well, actually, he isn't. But he can come out and defend himself if he wants to, can't he? He can come out and say, you're wrong there, Mr. Starmer, and this is why you're wrong. But I haven't heard him say that yet.
No, and there's plenty of time for him to do so. Were you surprised by the tone, particularly of the original one that you mentioned, with the reference to child sexual abuse, but then also by the doubling down from Keir Starmer in the Daily Mail of all places, saying that he will give absolutely zero apologies for the choice of personal messaging and imagery?
Good for Keir Starmer.
But were you surprised? Did you, to coin a phrase, Alan, did you know he had it in him?
Well, Keir Starmer is a good man. I think he's come into politics for good reasons. I think he's come into politics to make the world a better place, according to how he thinks that should be. And actually, it's quite refreshing to see people in politics doing things like that, after all the grifting we've seen in recent times by the current incumbents. So I think it's quite good. And to a certain extent, I suppose I should applaud people's surprise that he's done it, because it does show that they think Keir Starmer is a good man, and I think he is. However, he will remain a good man in opposition unless we start mixing it.
It does. You see it that simply. You've got to get the gloves off at some point. The turning up for a gunfight with a pair of old boxing gloves and a copy of the Queensberry Rules isn't going to butter any parsnips.
There was a fantastic phrase by a man called James Carville, you may have heard of. He was very helpful to Bill Clinton's campaign. In fact, in 1992, I went over to observe and give a little hand to the Clinton campaign. I went to California with a specific intention of learning a few tricks. One of the things I came back to talk about, I didn't go on my own. I went with a couple of very good colleagues, but I came back to say, look, what we call as negative campaigning, it works, I'm afraid to say. And I don't like it. Of course I don't like it. I'd far rather us be able to win the battle on the moral high ground, but that's not how life works. People say they don't like negative campaigning. They don't like a poke in the eye with a sharp stick, but they're going to remember it, aren't they?
They certainly are.
It's rather easier. Imagine I'm coming out saying, look, here's my 16-point healthcare plan.
Yes.
And the Tories say, that geezer's going to put your taxes up. What are people going to remember?
What they're going to take away from it. It's odd, as you speak, I read some lines written today by the chief executive of something called Conservative Home. He says, there is no use whining when your opponent does something you wish they hadn't. Indeed, whining about it in this instant actively helps them. So you're on the same page, I think.
I think it's fantastic. I've been dancing a jig all weekend.
Alan Barnard or Alan in Wandsworth, whichever you prefer. Many thanks indeed. I think we might keep Alan's number on file as well, actually. Some fascinating insights there into the historical context for these ludicrous claims from some people on the right that Keir Starmer has gone to places that should not be visited. 13 after 12 is the time. It works. You might not like it, but it works. So the question of how badly do you want to win perhaps becomes more pertinent. Juan is in Welwyn Garden City. Juan, what would you like to say?
Hi, thanks for being the light in the dark, James. It really keeps me sane. I just want to say that the Conservatives are very good at campaigning, and if they run the country as they did campaigning, then I would probably vote for them. They are, they're at the moment in charge of setting the date and the scene for the next election, and they've changed constituencies and made it harder for younger voters to vote. And on top of that, they've got the British
we need to
media.
talk about this, don't we? We haven't covered it enough, I don't think. There's this ID requirement for people to
Absolutely. I mean, an Oyster card for 65 plus is valid, but an 18 plus isn't. It's just smacks of wrong.
Gerrymandering.
But the attack ad strategy is the right strategy. This is we're going to historically correct. I mean, you go back to ancient Greece, this is well understood. Everybody votes for the sweet shop owner and not the doctor's prescription, unless you have an educated electorate. It's just always going to be the way.
And it's comical, actually, the more you dig into the criticism. The idea that a newspaper that compared Tony Blair's baby son to Beelzebub can somehow criticise Keir Starmer for looking at the household tax affairs of the actual Prime Minister is as we've said a few times, beyond parody. Any qualms at all? Any sort of Michelle Obama-shaped qualms about going high when they go low?
Not at all. It's just it's the reality of politics of as it is today. My only qualm is that Labour don't have a good track record on social media. They haven't employed people like Cambridge Analytica to do really cutting edge.
You don't want to go. Even I wouldn't. I mean, I don't think anyone wants to see them go that far. But you're right. If the other lot are using weapons that you haven't got, then you're going to lose, aren't you?
Absolutely, and they haven't got. So unless they really got some new talent on board that's advising them on how to do it, they might find themselves on the back foot. However, stating that they shouldn't do this type of politics is a disservice, because this clickbaiting, if you would, normally, or even Aristotle criticised this type of democracy. He himself being put to death by people that voted on were against his ideas, but clickbaiting works.
It does, and so no wonder the sort of client media are very keen for the Labour Party to continue fighting against machine guns with balloons on sticks. I mean, it probably is best understood in those terms, as you've got two people squaring up for a fight, and you've got the right-wing media on the sidelines attacking one side for picking up a stick, while the other side has got an Uzi. There's nothing wrong with the Uzi. The Uzi's absolutely fine, but you're not supposed to pick up sticks. Thank you, Juan. Quite a lot of comments along these lines coming in. I shall share a couple of them. Phil writes, please congratulate Thomas Watts or whoever wrote the line, high on Keswick Peak in the 12 o'clock news. I just had a full laugh out loud moment. And another one says, I'm confused about that news report, James. Was the group high on a peak or high on a peak? It's nearly 20 past 12. Seriously. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A couple of corrections. Mohammed and others wonder whether Juan a moment ago got Socrates and Aristotle mixed up. I was thinking exactly that, actually. But I do know that I got, on a rather less highfalutin territory, I got Rodney and Del Boy mixed up when I was talking about the paternity of baby Damien in Only Fools and Horses. So I can certainly correct that. And offer up my apologies, but I think Juan got Socrates and Aristotle the wrong way around. I could be wrong. Alan Barnard's been back in touch with that quote that he didn't get to when talking about these Labour attack ads. It's rather good as well, from James Carville, the strategist. It's hard for the other guy to hit you if your fist is in his face, which I think is my takeaway, perhaps, from the so-called attack ads unleashed by the Labour Party over the weekend and condemned by newspapers that go after the dead fathers of opposition leaders and compare the baby children of Labour prime ministers to Satan. So there you go. If that doesn't get you the moral high ground, I don't know what does. Right, complete change now, and it's a bit of a weird one. And why are we doing it? Two reasons. Number one, I've got two friends. I don't know if they're going to be listening. And they're my age, but their children are a bit older than mine. So they've got the house back, as it were, but both the kids have moved out, and they have taken up vaping in the last 6 months. One of them smoked years ago, gave it up ages ago, but they've recently taken up vaping, which just made me giggle. And then I stopped giggling and I thought, hang on a minute, this is quite serious, because I don't know anything about it, and yet it's everywhere. The question I'm going to ask you is whether it does it more harm than good. And the reason I'm going to ask you that question is because the government is about to announce that 1 million smokers in England will be encouraged to swap cigarettes. It's probably not the government, actually. Yes, it is the government. It's Neil O'Brien. Every time I see his name in the newspaper, I have to do a double take. Mr. O'Brien, it says here, is expected to say. How do you know what he's going to say? Well, they've leaked the speech. Up to 2 out of 3 lifelong smokers will die from smoking. Cigarettes are the only product on sale which will kill you if used correctly, Mr. O'Brien is expected to say. We will offer 1 million smokers new help to quit. We'll be funding a new national swap to stop scheme, the first of its kind in the world. And what it will do is see the government working with councils and others across the country to offer 1 million smokers, count them, 1 million smokers, a free vaping starter kit. It's estimated by officials to cost around 45 million quid over 2 years, and it will come from the Department of Health and Social Care's budget. Do you know that about 9% of women still smoke during pregnancy? They're going to get even more financial incentives. They're essentially going to be offered £400 worth in vouchers to give up smoking while pregnant. Now, it's tempting to have a Tufton Street flavoured conversation about whether or not the government should ever be getting involved in things like helping people live longer by spending taxpayers' money on schemes designed to help people live longer and save enormous sums of money for the NHS. But it's only in a Tufton Street flavoured universe that would be considered a debatable issue at all. I'm going to come from a position of even more ignorance than usual, which I'm sure you'll enjoy. And I'm going to suggest to you that my own cursory experience of vaping suggests that it's perhaps not the answer to all of these problems. I don't know. I'm going to ask whether it actually it's done more harm than good. I see vapes that are about as close to being a Haribo flavoured as it's possible to get without actually breaching Haribo's trademarks. They are so obviously aimed at young children, not just youths, but young children, the kind of children who spend their pocket money on sweets. Now, I don't know how carefully policed it is. I don't even know what the law is, to be honest with you. But the idea that vaping is a sort of panacea to help solve the problem of smoking is one that I would love to be true. And I'm hoping that it is true, and I'm hoping that you're going to tell me that it's true. But from my position of abject ignorance, I worry that this will just create loads more vapors without necessarily creating a new cohort of non-smokers. So about 1 in 5 smokers will be offered vape kits in the first national scheme of its kind. Will it work? 0345 6060 973. Okay. You can just do the straight up, what do you think about it? If you want. And it'd be quite nice to start before the 5:30 news, because we've overshot a little bit on the last conversation. So it'd be nice to get a call up before 5:30. I know what you do. You sit there waiting for my interminable introduction to end. And then as soon as I head towards the break, the phone lines explode. Well, that's not good enough, frankly. I can't be the one doing all the heavy lifting. You might know more about this subject than I do, and it would be good to get you on before 5:30. This is the kind of text I was worried about. I had to start smoking to quit vaping. That's how addictive they are. Are we buying that? Well, it's sent in. It's a text. Who owns the company providing the kits? Asked Lester. That's an interesting point. It's just another way of ensuring that the nicotine suppliers keep their market. These are all concerns that I share, but I know nothing about it. I have not got enough knowledge or understanding really to formulate a strong opinion. I know what you're thinking. I should have a column in the Daily Mail by tea time after that admission. But that's what I want to know from you. Illicit vape squads will be enforcing the rules as well. So there's going to be a crackdown on the sale of vapes to under 18s. Trading Standards will be conducting test purchasing and sharing intelligence across regional networks. So number 1, will it work? 0345 6060 973. And number 2, anecdotally, do you share my misgivings that vaping in general possibly does more harm than good? Okay, so that's what we want to know. Is it going to work? The scheme to get 1 million smokers off the fags? 0345 6060 973. And number 2, I don't know why I've got this sense that it is not quite the catch-all panacea golden solution to all sorts of problems that it is presented as. But if it's going to work in this context, then it is a good thing. Let's start in Leeds. Ali's there. Ali, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. I'm actually in London at the moment, but...
Why? What are you doing?
Oh, my parents are here, so I just come to help out some bits and bobs.
Fantastic.
So, nice to speak to you.
Likewise.
So, I'm a doctor, and I'm an ex-smoker,
okay.
And I sort of started at university age, and then kind of quit once I qualified. So, smoked for about 6 or 7 years cigarettes.
Yeah.
And then I started vaping. And
deliberately to get yourself off the cigarettes?
Yeah, so I'd quit a few times and gone back onto it and etc.
Yeah.
And then vapes came and it completely revolutionized everything for me.
Oh.
To the point that I actually even quit vaping once for about a year. It was actually. I was quite heavily into my sports, and I didn't actually notice any difference whatsoever in terms of cardiovascular fitness.
Gosh.
So I kind of just said, "Oh, we might as well get back on it," which I'm not saying they're a good thing. So don't get me wrong.
No, I understand what you're saying.
But so I'm not sure if you mentioned this. I just tuned in now, but NHS England claim there's a 95% harm reduction when it comes to vaping versus cigarettes, and that's pretty brilliant, if you ask me.
Yeah, okay. Is there a but coming?
The but is regarding what you mentioned, the Haribo kind of flavouring. So the but is for people that don't smoke, especially young kids, that get attracted. Because if you walk into a vape shop, I mean, I buy all my stuff online, but if you walk into a vape shop, it is like a sweet shop, and it's really.
So that's why they've had to announce the second bit, isn't it? Because I was a bit confused by the juxtaposition, but officials say it's the first scheme of its kind to be rolled out nationwide. It comes after ministers announced a crackdown on the sale of vapes to under 18s, so you can't be pushing it to the over 18s on this scale while still being very relaxed about the under 18s puffing away like it's going out of fashion. It seems a bit ambitious to me. I don't know that they'll have the bodies or the will to actually get really tough on the teenagers.
Well, what about cigarettes? Because they used to be marketed with, relatively attractive packaging, and now they're all bland. If I'm not mistaken, a package, and you can't display them, can you? They have to be behind.
So that's what you do. I don't think they're suggesting that they're going to do that. That's what they should just do overnight. It's just all vaping products should be in plain packaging.
Well, maybe they should head towards that direction.
You can't. You've got things like watermelon milkshake or something like that. He's not aimed at grizzled old doctors like you.
Cherry ice.
Cherry ice.
Myself.
Big girl's blouse. Honestly, I don't know. What's right? It used to be cowboys on horses smoking Marlboro Reds, and now you've got people puffing away on a cherry ice.
I'm not a real.
But it could. So in terms of your patients, I don't know what sort of doctor you are, but
I do ENT, so we get a lot of head and neck cancer.
Yeah.
So if I get a patient, and often these people, they've been smoking for so long, and really I'm there and I've got a 10-minute consultation, and how likely am I, to convince this person to give up their nicotine addiction, a physiological addiction, which is extremely strong. So I advocate vapes to almost all smoking patients. A lot of them find a lot of success because they get that hit. There's also a muscle memory element of smoking, isn't there?
Yeah, of course there is.
You're so used to that, but you can do that with a vape. And so in my specific kind of category for my patients, they're absolutely brilliant. But like you've already mentioned,
it's going to have this aftermath.
Start at 10 years old.
And how do you encourage usage among people? I mean, it's a cut-off. It's an arbitrary day on the calendar, isn't it? You're under 18. Oh, no, it's terrible. Don't go near it. You're over 18 and you smoke. Oh, it's fantastic. It's the answer to all your problems. Let's give away 45 million quid's worth overnight. Thank you, Ali. I hope you have a nice visit to your mum and dad. 12:30 is the time. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines. Cherry ice, watermelon. I don't think you'd have a watermelon milkshake. What would you call it? Is that watermelon floss, candy floss or something like that? I don't know. I mean, they are so obviously aimed at children, these vaping products, that I don't think we've ever done it as a phone-in before, because it'd be a bit like asking whether bears defecate in the woods, wouldn't it? Or questioning the Catholicism of the Pope. No one can ring in and say that these products with their cartoonish packaging and their sweet flavours, as in confectionery flavoured flavours, are aimed at children. And equally, I think, if I've learned anything already, I've learned that they obviously play a very successful part in helping wean people off actual cigarettes. But I've got mates who've recently started vaping. They just quite fancied it. Ex-smoker, so that muscle memory that the last caller was talking about is there. There's that relaxation, that element. So anyway, we're just talking about it because there's £1 million, or rather 1 million smokers about to get free starter vape kits. And I guess at the moment that looks like a good idea, with the massive caveat that how do you encourage millions of over 18s to take up vaping while also simultaneously discouraging millions of under 18s from continuing to vape? Dan's in Brighton. Dan, what do you think?
Well, hi, James.
Hello, Dan.
I am an ex-smoker,
yes.
and I had childhood childhood asthma.
Oh, yeah.
But started smoking stupidly, probably at the age of 18, when I was, out and doing sort of time after school.
Yes.
Not doing time, having times after school where I felt I could smoke and be a bit cool.
You thought you were James Dean. You thought you were James Dean or Danny Zuko.
Like
yeah,
exactly that. I quit smoking for vaping for a number of reasons. One, I had a kid. She's now 11 years old.
Right.
And vaping had just sort of turned up, and I didn't want to smell of tobacco around the child.
Fair enough.
But I was absolutely massively addicted to nicotine.
Yes. How many a day were you smoking when you gave up cigarettes, roughly?
Oh, a packet.
Okay.
A packet. So, 20 a day, or more on the night out, probably.
Sure.
And really addicted to nicotine. And vaping was a really easy way to get off cigarettes, I've got to say.
Okay.
And just a brilliant way to stop the cigarettes. And the positive of that was that my asthma disappeared within, a couple of months.
Yeah.
Asthma gone. No need for inhalers, absolutely nothing. But especially post-lockdown, where I've been working from home predominantly, where I am right now, and just 1 second. Thank you. Little vape.
Carry on.
You can vape at your desk.
Yes.
You can vape at your desk. You can, if you have a low output vape, like I have, with very high strength nicotine. I think I probably use the strongest nicotine you can get. You can vape on a train. You can vape on a plane. You can vape in a meeting, and hardly anybody even notices. So I think there is a danger.
But you're still addicted to nicotine, then?
Massively.
Yeah. More than before?
I would say so.
Yeah.
I would say so, more than before. So,
well, this is the tobacconist's dream in a way, isn't it? Because they're still milking you for money.
Absolutely.
And it can't. I mean, obviously, it's not as bad for your health as smoking cigarettes.
It's way, way, way better for my health, and way.
But
better
it's still
for my
suboptimal.
wallet.
It's still suboptimal.
It is. It's 100% suboptimal. But I'm spending way less money doing it. But I'm way more addicted to nicotine. And if we're trying to create a nation that's not addicted to nicotine, I'm not sure 1 million free vapes
is the way to do it.
Is the way to go, unless you're a government minister who's just invested in, a vape manufacturing company.
Well, no one is suggesting that, Dan. No, genuinely, no one is suggesting that. But I am interested in where the impetus and funding and kits are coming. Because someone's getting a very tasty contract here, aren't they? 45 million quid's worth of government money over 2 years for knocking out vaping kits. Not an industry that strikes me as being in particular need of government support at the moment. But, perhaps we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Have you got any interest in giving up vaping, or are you just too far in to ever get out again?
I really enjoy vaping.
Okay.
I actually really enjoy it. Yes, I have an interest in not being dependent on something that I'm clearly dependent on. But it is just too easy and too pleasant and frankly pleasurable for me to consider right now giving up vaping.
I like it. 12:39 is the time. Thank you, Dan. So, I mean, it's not black and white, this, but it's also not quite the wonderful news that I might have felt it was when I first read the story, for a number of reasons. Someone's making a ton of money out of it. Giving up cigarettes is one thing. Giving up vaping is quite another, and you're just transferring, albeit with massive health improvements. Economically speaking, you're just transferring your money from one repository to another. And how are you going to persuade all of these children who are vaping that it's an absolutely awful thing to do when you're spending £45 million over 2 years encouraging their parents to vape? Stephen's in Sydney. Crikey. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I listen to your show all the time, all the LBC shows, in fact. And really do I feel the compulsion to call in. But I think this is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
I actually wish vaping would be, discontinued across the globe. I think it's extremely dangerous. As a vapor myself for the last 2 years, nearly everybody I know now is vaping or just recently taken up vaping.
Yeah.
The vast majority hate it. Wish they hadn't. Try to quit regularly and fail miserably. As a kid, I would never smoke. It was disgusting. It was horrible. It was so bad for you, as we were told. And, in my 30s, I started a little bit of social smoking, but nothing that I would ever describe as a habit.
Right.
I took up vaping. I'm now spending $7,000 or $8,000 a year buying vapes. I'm doing vapes, which are equivalent of 120 cigarettes every day. And exactly like your last caller said, why? Because you can do it anywhere. It's
well, a lot of people are objecting to that. You're not really allowed to do it on planes and trains, etc. But I think you can probably get away without anybody really noticing. But it is against the rules or discouraged. But you're the cautionary tale here. Then a relatively casual smoker, you took up vaping and you can't get out.
Yeah, please do not do it. Anyone listening, do not start vaping.
Well, what if you're a 40 a day cigarette smoker?
Like you said, I believe you're moving from one to the other.
Yeah, but your health is going to be improving if you give up 40 cigarettes a day and take up vaping instead.
I run marathons. I cycle long cycles. In 2 years, I can now feel my chest seizing, tightening, sharp pains when I'm exerting myself. And recently,
how much do you vape? How much do you vape?
Every single day, the equivalent of 120 cigarettes. That cannot be good for you, right?
Well, no. I have no scientific qualification, Stephen, but I am going to agree with you. But that makes you a slightly extreme example, I think.
Well, no, because my friends are all telling me that they are only increasing on the consumption.
Constantly increasing.
They're buying it every couple of days now rather than once a week. They're buying it daily rather than every few days. And I can tell you, I'm a director in a business. I'm not a silly person,
sure,
but I've lost all self-control. I've gone out in the middle of the night. As I say, I'm vaping in public spaces when I know the law states that you cannot. And I've just lost all control over this. Today, I quit this morning.
Yeah.
I quit this morning. And I was out at lunchtime buying another vape, rationalising with myself that actually I'll do it in 2 weeks when I turn 40 because I want to vape on my birthday.
Yeah.
And that's a nice time to finish. Am I going to do it? I blooming hope so.
Well, good luck.
I just wish 2 years ago I had never
gone near it. And, as you were speaking about smoking in the, vaping going out in the middle of the night, so I got this text. I too went back to smoking in order to quit vaping. I now don't do either, but I fear vaping is far more addictive. My friends and I would all talk about waking up in the night wanting to vape, which never happened when we smoked cigarettes. Many would keep their vape under their pillow.
Absolutely. It's permanently affixed to your hand. I will be moving stuff around the house, and I will be making it harder for myself because my vape is in my left hand. And so I've made myself one-handed.
Well, there was a bloke on the tube this morning, actually, now you come to mention it, who was vaping, presumably because he couldn't not do it. Thank you, Stephen. That was a much-needed corrective or counterbalance to some of the other calls that we've heard. And Elle's been in touch to say, I nearly did this. And I know what Stephen meant when he said that. He just, I'm a director of a business and I'm not a silly person. Elle's been in touch to say, James, I just want to say that I am also a director of a company and I am a silly person. It is 12:48. Some breaking news for you that crikey, this story is getting ever more story-like, as the rather splendid Trumpton Twitter account just said. Humza Yousaf, the new First Minister in Scotland, has just revealed that the SNP auditors resigned 6 months ago. It's hard to know what to say about the unfolding story in Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon's husband, of course, at the centre of a police investigation with full tents and forensic action on the front lawn of the home they share at the end of last week. You can't really do a phone-in on it because nobody knows any more than that. Literally what we just said. If facts emerge, then conversations about the broader impact or the lasting damage that it might have done to the party in particular or the independence movement in general will absolutely be ripe for talking about. But I tell you that, well, to my untutored eye, that can't be good, can it? If the auditors resigned 6 months ago, as the new First Minister has just revealed. So we'll keep an eye on that story and bring you any developments in it that seem pertinent. But at the moment, I haven't. Maybe Scottish listeners could come up with an angle, but I can't really see a way into a phone-in on it. don't see what you can say until more facts are known, really. But I could be wrong. Yeah, let me know if you think I am, as ever. Rick's in St Albans to steer us back to the vaping, Rick. It's a funny one, this. It's good on the one hand and then very, very bad on the other. Where are you sitting?
So, morning, James. I work in education and I
so do I.
Specifically drug education, so which is where we differ. So I spend a lot of my time talking to students about this, and vaping is not all bad.
No.
And the gentleman at the beginning, the doctor, was right in that the government's own Ministry of Health say it's 95% less dangerous than smoking because it doesn't produce smoke.
Right.
So there's no carcinogens actually in vaping from the smoke, which is the good thing, right? But there is a huge downside, and the downside is I can't stand in front of my students and say, well, this is what it's going to do to you in 10 or 20 years' time.
Because you don't know. Because you don't know.
No one knows. And there is emerging evidence from Japan, I think, and partly America. I think John Hopkins was looking at it, around, I think it's called vitamin E acetate, which is just one of the chemicals in the vapes. Because never forget that vapes are 100% chemical. There's nothing natural about them. So if you are ingesting and inhaling chemicals, there's going to be a biological effect.
Probably,
and some of it is that. Well, absolutely, certainly. And this vitamin E acetate is triggering problems in people's lungs.
Well, that might be what Steve was talking about over in Sydney. I'm always slightly wary of going, oh, you understand, just because, as you say, there is no actual evidence, and it may be, but you've come on immediately after someone who's putting away the equivalent of 120 cigarettes a day, and he can feel his lungs physically deteriorating and getting worse.
Some of my students are smoking these 600 puff a day units and burning through 600 puffs a day. Now they're up to, some of them produce 7,000 puffs a day, these vape units.
What's that in cigarettes?
Well, I mean, there's tens of thousands in cigarettes,
right.
But I mean that's like saying you could bash yourself over the head.
No, I know. I'm just being a bit thick and middle-aged. I don't understand the terminology. That's all, Rick. It's not middle-aged, actually, is it?
If we don't, I'm middle-aged as well. If we don't look at the chemical content, what we do know about it is that we can say sometimes people are inhaling more nicotine than they would by vaping if they were smoking cigarettes, because some of it is very
clearly.
high. They don't necessarily read what's on it. There's very little or no regulation within the industry yet. There's a knockoff industry coming out of China mainly, but other places as well, where fake vapes are available on the internet that look like the real thing, but of course aren't, like there is with any smoking and alcohol-related products as well. So there's all that downside. It does nothing to break the hand-to-mouth ritual at all. So that's going to be problematic. So what I'd say is the money, I can see that maybe there's a good intention, and I'm being really generous by saying maybe, but I would think that money probably better spent in education.
It's not. At least it's not as if the businesses that are historically involved in the provision of nicotine to consumers have a long and troubled history of keeping medical advice or medical evidence away from the consumer, or engaging in epic attempts to cover up the damage that they're doing to their clientele. Among the kids that you work with, how prevalent is it?
I mean, I work in a specific kind of a school where, so I'd say 95% of our students vape, but then we see a disproportionate number of children from difficult backgrounds. So I wouldn't say that's the same across the board.
No, fair.
But I do some work in mainstream, and I'm definitely seeing it going up. And there are certainly students I work with who have started vaping who have never smoked, like you said, your friend. It's absolutely aimed at kids in the same way that Alco Pops are. All the colours of the rainbow is very much aimed at starting people on it. But I have come across the odd adult who doesn't. So just very quickly, I used to work in probation, and I used to teach life skills to probationees. And one of
Oh no, phone line went. That's typical. That would talk about leading a horse to water and not letting it drink. He just set up that. He was going to say something. Oh, well, we'll try and get him back up. There's some question that I only want. This is what I meant when I said, he's used technical terminology. I don't know if it's true, because someone's now telling me that one of the things that that Rick referred to is actually already banned from UK vapes and e-cigarettes. So I just don't know. I'm sorry. You'll have to do your own research on this. Ryan's in wonderful, wonderful Copenhagen. Ryan, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello, Ryan.
In Denmark, they've actually banned all the flavours. You can only get 2 flavours, tobacco and menthol, which were the original.
Did you used to have candy floss and cherry ice and all that kind of?
All of them.
And then because all the kids were getting into it, so the government's taken action.
The government have taken action.
Interesting.
You can still buy the flavours online. Obviously, young children are less likely to order online.
Because it's the appeal of the packaging. You're in the shop, you can see it, it's easy to buy, you're out with your mates, you think it's
all the
cool.
packaging all the packaging in the vape shops now, they follow the same guidelines as cigarettes. They have to be in plain, boring, non-colourful packaging. It's just all one colour.
Yeah, seems quite straightforward, that, unless you are in, we saw the lad last week who was offering all manner of services to the gambling industry. It's not impossible to imagine politicians looking very sympathetically upon donors who are heavily involved in the tobacco or the nicotine industry, we should call it, shouldn't we, to distinguish from cigarettes or tobacco. It's the nicotine industry. It sounds a little more sinister than the vaping industry. We got Rick back. Rick, we got to the bit where you were working in probation, teaching them life skills and...
Okay, and halfway through one of the sessions, I took them outside for a comfort break, and all of them would smoke or vape. And one of my students was a guy who was like a stereotypical bank robber, that if you had to draw one, that is what you would draw if you were a child, a very physically imposing gentleman. And he pulls this gigantic vape out of his coat. I've never seen one quite as big as that. And he took this huge puff, and this plume came out, and I said to him, "What on earth is that? It smells really weird." And he said, "Custard."
Oh, I'm tempted now. Jonathan says, what happens, James, when more people get caught in the addictive trap mindset of vaping and then the manufacturers start to increase the price? Years down the line, we'll be talking about this in the same way that we were talking about those high-cost betting machines in the bookies. It's a good point. I hope you're wrong, obviously. Thank you, Rick. Last word on this to Ed in Canterbury. Ed, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I just want to defend adults liking the flavoured cherry. I like cherry-flavoured gin. I like cherry-flavoured Coca-Cola. And I have a cherry-flavoured vape. And I think that if you want to provide a good alternative to people, it has to be something which tastes better and you know,
to tempt you off the cigarettes. Well, that was the Danish model. You could only have menthol or tobacco because it's actually trying to discourage you from doing it at all. But I could let you keep your cherry ice, but you can't have the packaging that looks like Hubba Bubba.
I can deal with that.
All right.
That's fine with me.
It's a deal then. Carry on.
Thanks, Dave.
Oh, you're welcome. It's coming up to 12:58. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where what an interesting mix of conversations we've had today, eh? I thought the vape one would be interesting. Other stuff on the list this week. I want to look at the voter ID, but we're in the council election period now, so I'm worried that we might get into trouble. I need to do a bit of homework on that one, and we must. I was with a friend last night who is a humanist minister, specialising almost exclusively now in funerals, and I mentioned to her, she's one of my former producers. That's an interesting career path, isn't it? To go from producing the James O'Brien experience to conducting funerals almost every day. I don't know what other paths my former producers have followed, but that certainly was worth. And she was telling me about that conversation we've had in the past about the cost of funerals and the prohibitive cost, and how the industry is certainly open to understanding you could save look, we'll talk about how expensive funerals are later this week and whether or not they need to be. That's it from me for another day. We'll do it all again tomorrow from 10. I'm going to spend the whole week getting the day wrong. It's Tuesday today. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Global Player, rewind it, all the rest of it, download it for free from your app store or go to globalplayer.com. Swarbrick with you at 4, Sheila Fogarty with you now. 4 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 Sheila Fogarty